The blond youth, battered and bruised, lay amidst the rubble, his body aching. He struggled to lift a hand, demanding to know the identity of the cloaked figure standing over him and the reason for his torment. The cloaked figure remained silent for a moment, her gaze fixed, as if pondering the very question of her existence. Then, she lowered her hood, revealing the sharp, determined eyes of a young woman. She declared herself to be evil, asserting that she was no different from those she now faced. With a chilling resolve, she extended her hand, preparing to unleash a devastating power she named Dark Hole. Suddenly, the scene shifted dramatically, transitioning to the serene elegance of a grand, well-appointed room, adorned with a sparkling chandelier and coffered ceilings. The opulent interior continued, showcasing a finely crafted fireplace and a vase of flowers, hinting at a life of comfort and luxury. Without warning, the very fabric of reality within the room began to warp and distort, as if a powerful force was tearing through the dimensions. The unsettling disturbance intensified, affecting an ornate cabinet and an antique telephone, their forms momentarily blurring and shaking. As the strange phenomenon subsided, an elderly maid greeted a distinguished man in a suit, welcoming him home and introducing a young boy standing beside her as his son. The man, taken aback by the sudden revelation, could only respond with a questioning, "Is that so?" He finally spoke, his gaze steady as he acknowledged the presence before him, stating that they had finally met. His words carried a weight of expectation, noting not only the exceptional skill and compatibility with the Ark family's secret arts, but also the terrifying magical power residing within the infant. He warned that a thorny path lay ahead. The infant, now named Aprudo, was cradled gently, receiving a solemn wish to live his life valuing his convictions and unique way of being. Years later, the once infant Aprudo had grown into a spirited young boy, now engaged in rigorous sword training. His sparring partner cheered him on, acknowledging his determination. He called for an end to their practice, and his partner respectfully complied. Aprudo Ark, the son of a merchant, stood poised, his gaze sharp and focused. His mind drifted back to years ago, to the moment he first awoke to an unfamiliar ceiling. In that past, he had sparred with a man who called his name, and upon hearing it, Aprudo felt a profound, inexplicable connection. The profound connection, coupled with the name, suddenly clicked into place as he recognized it from a popular fantasy novel, Tales of the Lenana Country. He understood that this world was not merely his own, but one he had read about. At the same moment, the full, chilling truth dawned upon him. He was Aprudo Ark, the infamous black villain from the novel, whose actions had plunged countless citizens of the Lenana Country into despair. He understood that in the story, the biggest problem was not his magical potential or his family's secret arts, but something far more personal. The Aprudo Ark he had been reincarnated as was destined to be killed by the protagonist, Hitsuji Arudo, a fate he now vividly imagined. He reflected on the simple reason for his defeat in the original narrative. He had no allies. His future self, the black villain, stood alone, sword in hand, against an unseen foe. Although he possessed the strength to grasp the kingdom's problems, some of the lower-ranked nobles sided with the protagonist. As the situation worsened, they were filled with a longing for the hero, abandoning Aprudo to his solitary fate. As a result, when he faced the protagonist and his allies, Aprudo was left alone, his destiny to be defeated by the inevitability of overwhelming effort. He realized that if the story continued like this, he would be killed by the protagonist, a fate he found absolutely unacceptable. He considered the two options for avoiding this predetermined end: either befriend the hero or overcome the hero as the villain. He concluded that the first option would not work, stating plainly that he hated the hero. He declared with fierce resolve that he would not lose. Since he was born as a villain, he would become a villain as the original work intended it to be, but with a different outcome. He resolved to eliminate all uncertainties and make thorough preparations to become an absolute evil before the start of the original work. His training intensified, his sword movements sharp and precise, reflecting his unwavering determination. He declared with fierce resolve that he would crush the protagonist, his sword poised for a decisive strike. Yet, a fleeting thought of surrender, a whisper of doubt, crossed his mind, even as his sparring partners looked on in shock. As his sparring partners acknowledged his prowess, he clarified his immediate objective: to gather trustworthy comrades for his grand purpose. He affirmed his commitment to this path with a sharp, unwavering gaze. His sparring partners reacted with visible surprise and concern at the intensity of his declaration. He then considered the necessity of family, a thought that seemed to bring him a moment of frustration or annoyance. He explained the troublesome nature of his absolute evil skill. While it promoted growth, its cost was to be hated. He apologized for his earlier irritation, clarifying that despite its cost, the skill was essential for him to become stronger. His loyal comrades quickly reassured him, insisting it was no trouble at all. He looked surprised as his sparring partners, with smiles, reaffirmed their unwavering loyalty, declaring themselves his servants. One of his sparring partners, still catching his breath, praised Aprudo's continuously improving sword skills, admitting he had been utterly overpowered by the end of their session. He confirmed that once he learned something, it transformed into a mysterious sensation that became his power. He possessed a truly versatile array of abilities, capable of healing others with medical techniques, using overwhelming force to eliminate lower-level techniques, and engaging in close combat with a sword. All these skills were underpinned by the growth-promoting skill known as absolute evil. He stood confidently, a self-starting individual of exceptional character, destined for greatness. He smirked, finding the unfolding situation increasingly interesting. He recalled a past directive. Until the main story began, He was to gather allies and establish himself. A voice announced that Viren-sama was calling for him, signaling an imminent summons. Moments later, the young Aprudo sat before Viren Arkarchi, who stated he had received reports detailing Aprudo's studies and training. The head of the family, Viren Arkarchi, continued, praising Aprudo's progress as well done and expected of the future head of the Ark family, yet reminded him to never cease polishing his skills. Aprudo reflected that his father, Viren Ark, initially seemed a frightening figure, but in truth, he was a proper villain, aiming to elevate their family to the most powerful position in the kingdom. He thanked his father for the kind words, promising to strive for continued success. He felt a rare sense of happiness, realizing it had been a long time since he had been praised. He also recalled a past instance where he had stopped an intertechnical discipline specialization due to its egregious nature. Viren Arkarchi then concluded the preliminary remarks, stating it was time to move on to the main topic of their discussion. He continued, informing Aprudo that next month, the royal family would host a commemorative party for Prince Michael's 10th birthday, an event where many nobles of Aprudo's age would gather. He instructed his son to attend as well. Aprudo, recalling that Prince Michael had sided with the protagonist in the original story, then asked if that was all, wishing to return to his training. His father warned him that he was easily misunderstood due to his exceptional skills and advised him to behave and remain quiet at the party. Aprudo acknowledged the instruction. Viren Arkarchi watched Aprudo depart, a slight smile playing on his lips. He mused that he had never expected his son to meet his gaze without being intimidated by his overwhelming presence. Suhai, the Division of Educational Affairs, stood silently behind him. Suhai then addressed Viren, inquiring if he had received reports that Aprudo's level had already exceeded 40. He found it suspicious, suggesting that Aprudo might be able to climb even higher. Viren confirmed that it had been the same during his own time. He then explained that by the time Aprudo took over his position, he would likely become one of the strongest individuals in the kingdom. He added that if they used force to crush the influence of other families and compel their submission, there should be no problem. He continued, asserting that this was the true essence of the Ark family's philosophy. Viren elaborated, acknowledging that while other nobles were obedient, he himself lacked popularity. He dismissed popularity as secondary, stating that the most important thing was power, evident to everyone, which he defined as violence. As Aprudo walked away, his father's voice followed him, explaining that to gain the loyalty of the nobles in the future, they must improve the impression Aprudo made. Otherwise, in the not-too-distant future, there was a possibility that the foundation of their power would crumble from within. Meanwhile, in the capital, within the Grand Royal Castle, a lavish party was underway. His Majesty the King and His Royal Highness the Prince Michael were present, observing the festivities. A distinguished man in formal attire introduced Duke Ku to those present, then inquired about another individual standing nearby. Viren Arkarchi, observing the scene, offered his congratulations on the occasion, with young Aprudo Ark standing beside him. The man, now identified as Count Jose, recognized Aprudo, who then formally introduced himself, stating, "I am Aprudo Ark, pleased to make your acquaintance for the first time." As Aprudo spoke, his gaze met that of a young blonde boy, and an intense, almost palpable tension sparked between the two. The blonde boy, visibly uncomfortable, averted his gaze, a slight frown creasing his brow. His father, Viren Arkarchi, called out to Aprudo, signaling it was time to depart. "Let's go, Aprudo," he instructed. Viren Arkarchi then engaged Count Jose in conversation, inquiring about his well-being. Count Jose replied that he was fine, but then confided that lower-ranked nobles were facing tough times, and even the upper-class Ark family was not immune to these difficulties. Count Jose continued, explaining that he had heard Aprudo's son would also be attending the event, and he wished to introduce his own son and pay his respects. The blonde boy, standing beside him, appeared increasingly nervous. The young Ark, with a piercing gaze, turned to the blonde boy and directly asked, "What is your name?" The blonde boy, flustered by the direct question, stammered slightly before introducing himself as Chris Jose, from the Jose family. Chris Jose, internally worried about being so disliked by the remaining members of the gathering, concerned for his future. Aprudo, however, simply offered a polite, "Nice to meet you," to which Chris Jose reciprocated, "Nice to meet you too." As Chris Jose grappled with his anxieties, Aprudo Ark, seemingly oblivious to the boy's internal turmoil, voiced his own thoughts, hoping he could reach out to the younger generation for now. His words seemed to resonate with some, as a young blonde girl with pigtails looked on in surprise, and a worried blonde boy peered from behind her, while Chris Jose averted his gaze, a nervous smile on his face. He continued, emphasizing that guiding them would be the best way to avoid destruction. Soon after, his father, Viren Arkarchi, addressed him, stating that Aprudo had already greeted most of the people and it was now time for the adults gathering. He instructed his son to go to the other floor, to which Aprudo dutifully replied, "Yes, father." Following his father's directive, Aprudo, accompanied by Chris, made his way through the grand hall, passing other children and adults who were also moving between the different sections of the gathering. As they arrived, he stood tall and composed, while Chris Jose walked slightly behind him, his head bowed, still appearing reserved. Among the other young nobles, the blonde boy with a worried expression spoke up, his face etched with distress, lamenting that this was what was necessary for a villainous role, as the blonde girl with pigtails and other children listened with concern. He continued to walk, the whispers of the other children reaching his ears. "Hey, look. Hey, hurry up. Ah, it's a party organized by the young ones. Go over there." He He processed their words, his thoughts unreadable. His gaze sharpened, a resolute determination hardening his features as he absorbed the atmosphere of the children's gathering. He surveyed the room, observing the other children running and playing, some glancing his way, as the sounds of their youthful energy filled the grand space. He observed the gathering of noble children, his gaze falling upon Chris Jose, who was being confronted by a group of his peers. One of the boys, with a smug expression, declared that Chris belonged to an underground family and expressed mock surprise that he dared to show up at such a celebratory occasion. As the other children echoed the sentiment, demanding Chris leave immediately, Aprudo turned his back, seemingly walking away from the escalating tension. Moments later, the blonde boy who had initially spoken shoved Chris, warning him that his continued presence would only lower the dignity of the entire party. Chris recoiled, his face contorted in distress. The sudden escalation caused several onlookers, including the dark-haired boy and the blonde girl with pigtails, to gasp in shock. A voice cut through the air, demanding to know what they were doing. The question came from Aprudo, who had returned, his presence now commanding attention as Chris lay on the floor, surrounded by the startled bullies. Chris looked up, his eyes wide with surprise and tears, seeing Aprudo standing over him. Aprudo stood firm, his back to the other children, and reiterated his question with an unwavering tone. "Let me ask again." He emphasized his resolve by firmly planting his foot on the polished floor. Turning to face the group of bullies directly, Aprudo's expression was stern as he demanded to know, "What are you doing to the members of the Ark family?" Chris Jose, still on the floor, looked up at Aprudo, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. He realized that Aprudo was claiming him as a member of his own family, and that the situation had clearly involved violence. Still on the floor, Chris Jose looked up in fear as Aprudo Ark stood over him, his gaze sharp and unwavering. Aprudo declared that he would hear their reasons first, implying a chance for forgiveness depending on their response. The other noble children, who had been bullying Chris, watched with expressions of shock and apprehension. Aprudo then turned his attention to the group of bullies, his eyes narrowing. He dismissed them as insignificant fools, mere numbers, his expression hardening as he conveyed his profound annoyance at their behavior. The bullies recoiled in terror, their faces contorted with fear. The blonde boy, previously malicious, stammered, asking if Aprudo was trying to pick a fight with the Ark family by laying a hand on those under their protection. His gaze intensified, a silent threat that sent shivers down their spines. Aprudo declared that he would remember their faces and commanded them to be gone, his voice laced with an undeniable authority that compelled them to flee in a panicked rush. The grand hall, once filled with the children's commotion, now echoed with the sounds of their hasty retreat, leaving only a few figures in the distance. Moments later, Aprudo stood tall amidst the vast hall, his presence commanding. The group of noble children who had been bullying Chris now returned and knelt before him, their heads bowed in submission. Among the kneeling children, Chris Jose remained on the floor, still looking distressed, while the others, including the blonde girl with pigtails and the worried blonde boy, showed expressions of deep remorse and fear. Aprudo, however, seemed to momentarily break his stern demeanor, realizing he had forgotten to release some kind of internal pressure or suction. He quickly commanded himself to release it, a subtle shift in his aura. Chris, still recovering from the ordeal, looked up at Aprudo, offering his thanks for saving them. Aprudo, now facing the kneeling children, offered an apology, not for his actions, but for tarnishing the name of the Ark faction, implying his previous display of power might have been excessive or unbecoming. He extended a hand towards the young boy, his gaze sharp and piercing, while the boy flinched, eyes wide with apprehension. His hand then settled firmly on the boy's shoulder, a gesture that seemed both commanding and unsettling, as the boy remained frozen in place. The young boy's eyes, still wide with shock, reflected a profound realization of his predicament. Aprudo then addressed him directly, confirming his identity as a member of the Jose Count's family and remarking on the truly terrible situation he found himself in. Kneeling before Aprudo, the young boy, Chris Jose, apologized for the unsightly scene, explaining that the presence of many higher-ranked families had prevented him from rebelling, which ultimately led to the escalation of the incident. Beside him, the blonde girl with pigtails also knelt, looking on with a stunned expression. Chris continued, taking full responsibility for the events and earnestly pleading for Aprudo to spare the others from any punishment. The other kneeling noble children watched, their faces etched with shock. Suddenly, the blonde girl with pigtails rose to her feet, interrupting the exchange. She introduced herself as Lady Cruel of the Cruel family. She then declared that she and the other children were responsible for the incident, asserting that Chris-sama had been injured while protecting them. Aprudo listened intently to her unexpected confession. Lady Cruel, with a determined expression, pleaded for mercy on Chris-sama, while Aprudo, his back to the kneeling children, considered her words. Chris looked on, surprised by her intervention. Internally, Aprudo scoffed at the idea of jealousy, but then, with a sudden outburst, he loudly declared his frustration. "Chris, you're more popular than I am." He declared that he understood the situation, his expression serious and unwavering. He then turned his gaze to the group of noble children, asking if they truly understood why the incident had occurred. He clarified that the fault did not lie solely with Chris, but was a combined responsibility shared by all of them. One of the boys, looking anxious, tentatively suggested it was because their lower-ranked families were underestimated by their opponents. Aprudo, however, instructed Chris to answer the question on behalf of everyone present. He continued his interrogation, acknowledging their poor reputation and questioning why, Despite knowing this, they had all eagerly gathered there. Chris Jose knelt on the ground, his face contorted in distress. Aprudo explained that they should have known they would be treated with contempt without the presence of higher-ranking nobles to protect their status. Chris, tears welling in his eyes, cried out in frustration, asking what exactly he was supposed to do if such contempt was the necessary reality for those considered villainous members. Aprudo Ark stared intently at Chris, his expression unreadable, and asked a pointed question. Why had he not waited for him? Lady Cruel and the worried blonde boy exchanged glances, both reacting with visible surprise to Aprudo's unexpected question. Aprudo stood before the kneeling children, reiterating that the incident occurred because they were lower-ranked and their opponents were higher-ranked. He then posed a hypothetical, asking what would have happened if he had been present at that time. He concluded, stating that even though the opponents were overwhelmingly powerful, they had become scared and fled, despite him not having finished his training yet. He addressed the group of noble children, his voice firm as he reminded them of their responsibility for the recent incident. His declaration hung heavy in the air, causing the children to flinch and recoil in fear as he announced his intention to impose a punishment. He lowered his gaze, a subtle shift in his expression hinting at the weight of his decision. Then, raising his hand, he issued a stern command. In the future, whenever they participated in events or entered the academy, they were to remain within his sight as much as possible. He emphasized this as a crucial lesson from the incident. The children listened intently, their faces a mix of apprehension and understanding as they absorbed his words. He clarified his stance, insisting they not misunderstand his actions, for everything he did was for the sake of the Ark family. Meanwhile, Chris Jose, tears streaming down his face, could only utter Aprudo's name in distress. He continued, his voice unwavering, commanding them never to separate from him without permission again. The children, now kneeling before him, absorbed his absolute decree. They responded in unison, a terrified, "Why yes," escaping their lips, their expressions a clear testament to their fear and submission. He then declared that this was the inherent duty of those who stood above, a responsibility he clearly embodied. Below him, the blonde girl with pigtails and the worried blonde boy looked up, calling out his name with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The demonstration began, illustrating the intricate process of fusing water and wind magic into a cohesive force. As the magical energies swirled, the young man, Chris, addressed a lady, explaining that her own acquired magical affinities were water and wind, and what she was witnessing was a practical application of those elements. The lady watched, her eyes wide with wonder, as the combined magic solidified into a complex, sparkling crystal structure held delicately in her hands. She turned to her companion, marveling not only at the sheer magical power displayed, but also at the incredible control required to shape it so precisely. Her companion, equally impressed, could only utter a quiet affirmation. Beaming with admiration, she declared that such a feat was precisely what one would expect from Absolute Sama, a title Chris accepted with a simple, confident affirmation. Still captivated by Chris's abilities, Lady eagerly inquired if he also possessed fire magic, noting his proficiency with fusion magic. Her companion, young man too, confirmed her assumption. As Chris conjured a small, controlled flame in his palm, he explained that fire magic, with proper training, could be developed as a standalone skill, advising young man too to focus on his individual strengths. Young man too, wide-eyed with awe, addressed him as Absolute Sama. Following Prince Michael's birthday party, Chris and Lady, acting under a higher command, offered their apologies for past transgressions. Subsequently, they began organizing various social and educational events, including magic training sessions and formal tea parties. Meanwhile, Chris observed young man too and Lady engaged in their activities, a quiet satisfaction settling over him as he felt the distance between himself and the nobles under his command gradually diminish. Young man too then approached him, respectfully calling out his title. He then turned to Chris, expressing a desire to ask about the specific magic Chris had employed during the recent party. A sudden realization dawned on young man too, his eyes widening as he understood it had been healing magic. Chris, observing young man too, mused internally about the young man's reputation for talent in both magic and swordsmanship, pondering the unique individual he was at such a young age. Moments later, both young man too and Lady called out to Chris, who turned to acknowledge them. In the background, two maids discreetly observed the interaction. A voice then offered a welcome respite, suggesting everyone take a short break, as a beautifully arranged tea service awaited them. During the tea break, young man too, still processing Chris's diverse talents, expressed his astonishment that Chris could wield healing and dark magic in addition to the four elemental attributes of fire, water, earth, and wind. Lady, beside him, reiterated her profound impression. She gazed with sparkling eyes, declaring her profound respect and affection for Absolute Sama. He observed her, musing that Lady possessed a quality that naturally evoked protective instincts in others. As they continued their tea, Chris explained to young man too that merely possessing numerous usable spells held little significance. When nobles engaged in conflict, he asserted, unique magic became paramount. This unique magic, he elaborated, was passed down through generations of noble families, usable only by those of a specific lineage. However, strict conditions applied. A person had to be at least 15 years old and officially recognized for their inheritance. Until then, regardless of their talent, they could not wield it. Young man too then inquired if the Ark family's unique magic was indeed Ark Summon, which Chris confirmed, adding that it involved summoning spirits from the spirit world. Furthermore, he revealed, these were no ordinary spirits. They were high-ranking entities, part of the 17 known as the lineage of the Spirit King. In the original story, this magic boasted enough power to annihilate 40% of the subjugation party, a formidable force capable of turning the tide of battle. Above all, he considered, this magic held the invaluable quality of never betraying its wielder. With a determined glint in his eyes, he declared his intention to inherit it soon. Young Man 2 swallowed hard, visibly shaken by Chris's ambition, while Lady gasped in awe, finding his resolve truly wonderful. In other words, he had only 5 years remaining until he could claim his inheritance. He reflected on the timeline, knowing it would be 5 years until his school admission, the first major event of the original story, the story of the Reincarnated Kingdom. He mused that there was no oversight in the preparations, leaving the rest to his own devices. As he considered his future, he declared his intention to select and educate a slave from the Jose family to serve as his maid when he entered school. He then asked if someone could speak to Count Jose about it. Young Man 2, surprised, readily agreed. Young Man 2, however, quickly suggested that there was no need to bother with the Jose family. He proposed that it would be quicker if they chose someone from the Ark family instead, acknowledging that the Jose family was indeed engaged in slave trade, making it a possible option. Lady looked on with a curious expression. Chris, however, firmly rejected the idea, stating his strong dislike for the people of his own house. He narrowed his eyes, wondering if his companions suspected something was amiss. He internally reasoned that everyone in the original story disappeared, and he needed someone who would never betray him. A slave, he concluded, would not betray their master, and this would prevent the protagonist from having any opportunities against him. He recalled an old lady who wore a maid outfit when he was born, but she had passed away 3 years prior. Now, the old maid's daughter, Mido, a woman of 48, was taking care of him. He found this situation scandalous, observing that the aging Ark family's mansion felt more like a mature maid cafe, as several other older maids were also present, striking poses. Young Man 2, understanding Chris's preferences, assured him that they would prepare the highest quality slave. He then inquired if Chris had any specific requests. Chris, taking a sip from his teacup, added that he preferred someone with self-defense abilities. He emphasized that race did not matter. Lady listened intently. Lady, hearing his requirements, excitedly offered herself, asking, "How about me?" Chris, however, bluntly dismissed her offer, stating there was no need. Chris, still focused on his plans, confirmed his understanding of the arrangements for his future maid. Lady, nearby, let out a soft sigh. He then addressed Young Man 2, instructing him to contact him once the arrangements were complete. Young Man 2 affirmed his commitment, stating he was counting on it. Moments later, Young Man 2 confirmed the instructions with 2 maids, one of whom was Mido, who both acknowledged his words with a polite yes. As the maids moved about, Chris observed them, a slight tremor in his hand betraying an underlying tension. He then walked away, accompanied by the 2 maids, leaving the grand building behind. Later, Chris found himself once again in the presence of Lady, who looked at him with a concerned expression. She expressed pity for Absolute Sama, lamenting that his reputation might not serve him well at the academy, and admitted her own lack of consideration. She then offered to provide comfort. Chris, however, questioned her intentions, asking what she had been doing earlier and if she was merely putting on an act, suggesting that Absolute Sama was not so easily swayed. Lady, undeterred, smiled brightly, internally musing that this kind of character might be better for her goal of getting closer to him, noting that despite his annoyance, he hadn't outright refused her. Chris, observing her, let out a soft humph, wondering if her earlier impression of being in love was merely a pretense. Her face flushed. Lady considered her feelings. She believed her devotion was pure love, dismissing any other interpretation of her intense affection. He, Chris, had experienced similar misunderstandings in the past, leading to him being abandoned. He recounted how he had been helped at a party after such an incident, as Young Man 2 and Lady listened intently. Young Man 2, hearing Chris's story, felt a swell of emotion in his chest. He then asked if Chris had been told about the absolute evil skill afterward, to which Chris confirmed. Lady, listening to the conversation, resolved that if Chris ever seemed alone again, she would be by his side without fail. She clenched her hand, her determination evident. She then explained her strategy, stating it was better to approach Chris comically, as there was no need to be reserved around others. She believed this would convey that she was a big-hearted person. Young Man 2, sharing her sentiment, clenched his fist with a firm grip. He declared that he would never abandon Absolute Sama again. He further asserted that ensuring Chris's well-being and surrounding him with allies was his personal responsibility. Lady, pleased with his resolve, simply affirmed his statement with a smile. As they walked together, Lady remarked that approaching Young Man 2 first had indeed been the right choice, seeking his confirmation. She then elaborated on her motivations, explaining that she needed to lay the groundwork for future issues and keep other women from making advances. Young Man 2, however, questioned if the latter was truly the real reason. Young Man 2, with a hopeful expression, pondered the necessity of having many allies for Absolute Sama, wondering if it was truly the best approach. Meanwhile, Chris prepared to depart in an ornate carriage, while an older butler, his guardian, bid him farewell, instructing him to take care on his journey. Chris simply acknowledged the instruction. His destination was the imposing structure known as the House of Count Jose, a mansion infamous for its association with slave trading. As the grand gates slowly opened with a creak, Chris stepped through, entering the grounds of the notorious estate. Inside, he and Young Man 2 were greeted by Count Jose himself, who offered a polite welcome and thanked them for their arrival. Young Man 2 then addressed Chris, requesting to be treated kindly during their visit to Absolute Sama. Count Jose, turning his attention to young man 2, explained that as per their request, he had selected many slaves possessing self-defense abilities. He further clarified that Chris would be in charge of guiding them, and any needs should be communicated directly to him. Young man 2 listened with a look of surprise. The Count continued, detailing that restrictions were imposed on the behavior of slaves, and advised young man 2 to take care of himself. He then apologized for the formality, inviting them further inside. Chris, standing beside young man 2, responded to the Count, stating that there was no need to lower the price, as incurring debt would be troublesome. Count Jose acknowledged his understanding. With a confident smile, Chris expressed his gratitude to Count Jose for his hard work, while the Count, looking pleased, acknowledged the sentiment. He listened as young man 2 explained the intricacies of the contract skill, which bound the actions of the slaves, ensuring they would cause no trouble. The grand room of Count Jose's mansion served as a stark backdrop to this discussion of human commerce. Moments later, young man 2 guided him towards an ornate chair, instructing him to wait there. He then announced that the slaves would be brought in one by one for individual assessment. Seated comfortably, he observed as young man 2 further clarified the process, confirming it was indeed an individual interview system. He was told to simply indicate if he found a slave to his liking. He considered the gravity of the situation, reflecting that acquiring a slave was akin to purchasing a house, a once-in-a-lifetime decision that demanded careful and thorough consideration. The soft patter of bare feet announced the arrival of the first candidate. He looked up, a small, polite smile gracing his lips as he offered a quiet thank you for their patience. Standing before him was a young girl, her dark hair adorned with wolf ears, her wrists and ankles bound by chains. She nervously introduced herself as an 8-year-old from the wolf tribe. He gazed at her, a flicker of intrigue in his eyes, wondering if this unexpected meeting could, in fact, be fate. A young man, Chris, sat observing as another young man presented a small, chained girl from the wolf tribe. The presenter explained that she was being brought in now, and if Chris found a slave he liked, he should make a request. The wolf tribe girl, only 8 years old, looked up with tear-filled eyes, her small hands clasped in a desperate plea. She begged to be bought, her voice trembling. Chris's gaze sharpened, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Her persistent crying, however, began to irritate him. He remarked that she looked as if she would burst into tears at any moment, and that it was annoying to have her cry so much every time. The other young man flinched, clearly surprised by Chris's bluntness. He pondered the situation, considering the wolf tribe's reputation as a hostile race, yet acknowledging their strength, even at such a young age. The young man confirmed her strength, adding that her current level was 18 and her skill was purification. He suggested that if one were to include the era of the gods, the wolf tribe would be the strongest. Chris mused that it would be a waste to not have a rare skill. Still, he observed her fear, noting that she was currently terrified. He thought that if he were to treat her gently, she would eventually grow accustomed to him. The girl, still visibly distressed, let out a small gasp, her eyes wide and brimming with tears. Her cries intensified, a raw, desperate wail escaping her lips as she clutched her chained wrists. Her distress seemed to push Chris to a decision. He grimaced, a clear expression of annoyance on his face, and muttered that perhaps he should just stop. He then turned to the young man, his expression still one of irritation, and instructed him to call for the next one, stating that he understood. The young man, holding a tablet, simply replied, yes. He sat casually in his ornate chair, observing the broad back of his attendant, who stood before him. The attendant turned, revealing a new candidate. She was a muscular woman, bound by chains, who introduced herself as Elizabeth, aged 43, and offered to be bought if Chris found her cute. Chris, however, looked utterly unimpressed, his expression one of clear annoyance, and he curtly demanded the next candidate. Moments later, a new set of bare feet stepped onto the polished floor. The new candidate stood silently, her short, light hair framing a delicate profile. Chris watched her, his chin resting thoughtfully on his hand, a stark contrast to his previous irritation. Her wrists, like the previous candidates, were bound by heavy iron shackles and a chain. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes widening with a hint of surprise or recognition. The young woman then spoke, introducing herself as Maria Stella and stating her age as 15. The name resonated with Chris. He mused that he had heard it somewhere before. His attendant then elaborated, explaining that Maria Stella was a former noble who had fallen into slavery due to insurmountable debt, but importantly, she possessed the skills of a knight. He suddenly remembered. Maria Stella, the former noble, had her inherent magic sold before she turned 15, preventing her from inheriting it. He recalled that Maria Stella was the heroine of the Karena Kingdom story, a figure akin to an older sister. Yet, he mused, she was meant to be a heroine who would dote on her deceased younger brother, not someone bought by a protagonist to become his first servant. He then pictured her in her knightly attire, chiding him with a firm yet gentle tone, asking if he had already given up. She offered her shoulder, reminding him that their training was far from over. Her expression softened, a gentle smile gracing her lips as she observed his sleeping face, finding it endearing. The memory shifted to a younger version of himself, being bathed by Maria Stella, who, wrapped in a towel, playfully scolded him for his shyness, insisting she would wash him thoroughly. She even teased him about his reaction, a familiar dynamic that made him realize she had always been this way. Snapping back to the present, he rubbed his temples in exasperation, muttering about the protagonist's troublesome nature. He then envisioned a younger version of himself, standing alongside the Arc-summoned spirit, contemplating that by keeping Maria Stella close, he could harness the protagonist's formidable fighting power. His eyes narrowed in thought, realizing that if he successfully navigated the upcoming events, Maria Stella would regain the ability to use her inherent magic. The decision was made. He then turned to the young man, declaring his decision was final. He also issued a stern warning not to attempt to sell Elizabeth, to which the young man, holding a document, responded with a questioning Elizabeth. He declared his intention to acquire Maria Stella, but then, with a slight smile, he added a warning. It would be regrettable if Elizabeth were to be sold. He then extended his hand, requesting the contract. Moments later, he sat at a desk, meticulously signing the necessary documents with a quill, his expression focused. As the transaction concluded, he turned to observe the two figures now standing before him. Count Jose, holding a document, confirmed that the transfer had been duly received. The two women, Elizabeth and the Wolf Tribe girl, reacted with starkly contrasting emotions. Elizabeth's face contorted in a furious scowl, while the Wolf Tribe girl trembled with wide-eyed terror. With a confident smirk, Chris addressed them, asserting his new identity as their master, Absolute Arc, and stating that they would now serve him as his maids. Upon hearing the name Arc, the Wolf Tribe girl recoiled in utter horror, her face a mask of pure dread, while Chris observed her reaction with a subtle, knowing gaze. Elizabeth, her chained wrist visible, glared at Chris, her anger palpable. She questioned if he was truly from the Arc family, expressing her profound disgust at the thought. Her fury escalating, Elizabeth defiantly demanded to know what he intended to do to them. She declared that she would rather die than endure any humiliation. Chris, unfazed by her outburst, simply stated that he had no intention of killing them. He mused that the Arc family seemed to have a rather harsh reputation. However, his unexpected words left both Elizabeth and the Wolf Tribe girl stunned, their expressions shifting from defiance and fear to utter bewilderment as a new realization dawned upon them. He declared with chilling authority, his eyes sharp and unwavering, that Elizabeth and the Wolf Tribe girl were now his slaves, a truth they were never to forget. This assertion was backed by a powerful ability he called skill, King's Hegemony. Her eyes widened in shock, a gasp escaping her lips as the weight of his words settled upon them. Beside her, the younger girl trembled, her own face a mask of terror, both bound by their chains and his decree. The Wolf Tribe girl, overwhelmed by fear, began to pant heavily, tears welling in her eyes as she struggled to comprehend their new, grim reality. Elizabeth's initial shock quickly morphed into a defiant glare, though the younger girl beside her continued to weep uncontrollably, utterly terrified by Chris's declaration. Chris, observing their reactions, issued a stern warning, telling them to watch their words from now on and demanding to know if they understood. With a satisfied smirk, Chris watched as both Elizabeth and the Wolf Tribe girl knelt before him, their chains clinking softly. The younger girl meekly affirmed her understanding, while Elizabeth, though still defiant in spirit, offered a formal apology. Chris mused internally that he had successfully made two women understand their place. Meanwhile, in a different part of the Grand Estate, Maria Stella now served as a maid, her composed demeanor unchanged despite her new role, as the evening lights illuminated the imposing architecture. An older maid approached Maria Stella, kindly inquiring about her work and if she was getting accustomed to her duties. Maria Stella replied respectfully that she was mostly adjusting, addressing the older woman as Mito-sama. Maria Stella then confessed that she had initially been anxious about what harsh tasks she might be forced to perform, but found that her duties were surprisingly ordinary. The older maid, Mito-sama, then asked if things were going well with Absolute-sama. Maria Stella hesitated, her expression subtly shifting, and replied with a simple, yet telling, no. She reflected on her initial struggles with Chris, noting that while she found him difficult, she couldn't bring herself to believe he was truly a bad person, especially considering his family name, Arc. She had spent months observing his life, and her understanding of him was changing. She continued her internal assessment, acknowledging that Chris's words often carried an air of arrogance, and his expressions were typically emotionless, occasionally revealing a haughty demeanor. Despite this, she admitted that her own back had been trained to endure such things. However, the old maid, Mito, offered a contrasting perspective, smiling gently as she stated that Chris had never once raised a hand against a servant or a subordinate noble. Indeed, the general impression from those around him was quite different from Maria Stella's initial perception. Mito then turned to Maria Stella, taking her hands firmly and reassuring her that she was doing well as a maid. Maria Stella looked surprised by the gesture. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the hall, startling Maria Stella, who immediately turned, asking what was happening. Chris and Lady were also present, looking alarmed. Maria Stella rushed to Chris, who had fallen to the floor, seemingly having tripped over something, with Lady looking on in distress. Maria Stella knelt, asking him what was wrong, while Chris, looking up at her, seemed to be thinking about how she was acting like a hateful person. Maria Stella, her expression now serious and somewhat pained, muttered to herself that Chris was truly out of tune with reality. Months later, a new question arose within the household. Would someone be resigning? Maria Stella, now seated with Mito, was informed that she had quickly learned her duties and that the Wolf Tribe girl's role was also complete. Mito then asked Maria Stella to take care of Absolute-sama. Maria Stella responded with a hesitant Mito, with a kind smile, then directly asked Maria Stella if she was not afraid of Chris. Maria Stella looked back at her, her expression unreadable. She considered the question, realizing that to say she wasn't scared would be a lie. Mito, observing her, explained that Maria Stella had the right to become a maid for Absolute-sama, and then revealed the true nature of Absolute-sama's skill. Maria Stella gasped, covering her mouth in shock, realizing that her initial impression of the skill was the worst possible scenario. Meanwhile, Mito and the butler discussed Chris, with Mito stating that everyone in the Ark household pitted Absolute Sama, treating him like a fragile thing. The butler added that Chris was highly sensitive to the atmosphere around him, which was why he rarely laughed. Mito clenched her fist, reflecting that it was the adult's responsibility, acknowledging that Maria Stella was still young and perhaps unreliable. Maria Stella, having made her decision, approached Chris and respectfully announced that she would be taking her leave from Absolute Sama. She then informed Chris that she had taken over Mito's duties and would now be the one to care for him. With a serious expression, she continued, explaining that Mito had taught her about his skill. Chris reacted with a start, clenching his fist, as Maria Stella looked at him intently and asked if it wasn't painful for him. With a fierce gaze, Chris declared that he did not care how others perceived him or what they thought. He asserted that everyone was afraid of Absolute Sama, and he would never change. Chris's defiant declaration echoed in Maria Stella's mind, leaving her with a profound sense of his terrible resolve. Her expression was one of deep concern, her hand pressed to her chest. He sat quietly, engrossed in a book, seemingly unaware of her presence. Maria Stella observed him, a melancholic understanding dawning upon her that he was still so young, yet already burdened by a fate that evoked pity. Her hands, held out as if reaching for something intangible, reflected her internal struggle. She knew he would continue to live, enduring pain, and she felt strongly that such a life was unacceptable for him. Driven by this conviction, she approached him from behind, wrapping her arms around his shoulders in a comforting embrace as he continued to read. Suddenly startled by the unexpected contact, he flinched, his head snapping back as he exclaimed in surprise. His face flushed with a mix of shock and embarrassment. He demanded to know what she was doing and ordered her to release him immediately. Her gaze, however, remained fixed on him, her eyes filled with a resolute determination as she softly uttered his title. She then declared her unwavering commitment, stating that from that moment forward, she would stand by his side as his maid, his knight, and his sister, never allowing him to be alone. Her purpose, she affirmed, was to heal the wounded heart of the young master. He listened, his eyes wide with astonishment. After a moment of silence, he finally responded, telling her to prepare the bath as he intended to rest. She looked surprised by his sudden change of topic, but quickly agreed to release him. With a mischievous smile, she then leaned in, her eyes sparkling, and asked if he wished for her to join him. She continued to smile, suggesting that after this, they would be together a great deal, but he vehemently refused, shouting that he would not go in. Meanwhile, the night had fallen over a quiet town, its rooftops silhouetted against the starry sky, as an unsettling, drawn-out sound began to echo through the stillness. The unsettling sound persisted as a shadowy, cloaked figure, his face obscured but his eyes glowing with malice, declared his sinister intent. He would use others to utterly crush the Ark family. Yet, despite his earlier refusal, he now found himself in the bath, looking flustered, as Maria Stella, positioned behind him, offered a gentle smile and a moment of healing. Chris, seated regally, addressed his subordinate, emphasizing the Ark family's necessary role as villainous nobles. He continued, explaining that the Ark family was a necessary evil for the Reina Kingdom, tasked with managing the country's hidden evils and punishing those who came from other nations. The young man acknowledged his understanding. He pondered the truth, realizing that in the original narrative, the Ark family was merely depicted as villains, but in reality, they were the unsung heroes who secretly protected the nation. He considered the grave danger they faced, contemplating the possibility that if the hero ultimately defeated them, the country might abandon them. The young man then inquired about their current mission, asking what the specific task entailed. Chris listened, his expression unreadable. Chris then elaborated, revealing that a color gang, unaffiliated with either the royal capital or the Ark family, was secretly importing weapons from an imperial organization. He stated that the enemy force numbered approximately 300. He then issued a chilling command, instructing his subordinate to kill them. The young man affirmed the order with a resolute gaze, emphasizing that not a single one should be left alive. Chris then mused on the location of the operation, noting it was on the border between the Reina Kingdom and the Aquamarine Imperial Territory, and suspected that the main culprit was Duke Noel of the Empire. The young man listened intently. He continued to explain the intricate political landscape, revealing that the Ark family and Duke Noel's organization were not allies, but rival powers. The Ark family had long protected the country, while Duke Noel's influence had recently expanded to other nations, including Reina, which now found itself targeted. The shadowy figure further clarified that the conflict between the Ark family and Duke Noel's organization had endured for many years, explicitly labeling Noel's group as a rival organization. Maria Stella listened intently, absorbing every detail. Meanwhile, back at the Ark family mansion, Chris, now dressed in his formal attire, prepared for his mission. Lady, holding a teacup, inquired if he was heading out, while the Wolf Tribe girl stood ready with a weapon. Chris confirmed his departure for work and instructed them to prepare. Lady, her expression filled with concern, then asked if she should accompany him. She insisted that she would not be a hindrance, while the Wolf Tribe girl, looked on with a worried expression, echoing her concern. Chris, now cloaked and ready for battle, firmly rejected their offer, stating that his presence alone was sufficient. He then instructed them not to wait up for him, as he might not return tonight. Lady and watched him, their faces etched with profound concern. As he walked away, Lady and bid him farewell, urging him to be careful on his perilous journey. Meanwhile, in the Aquamarine territory, a leader addressed a large gathering of the Color Gang, rallying them to crush the top of the rival organization and seize control of the country. As the leader finished his speech, a sudden, dark force descended from the sky. Chris, now airborne and cloaked, appeared amidst a swirl of dark energy, ready to strike. The leader looked up in shock, questioning the sudden appearance. He unleashed a torrent of dark energy, manifesting a swirling vortex as he cried out, "Dark hole!" The powerful spell erupted, its gravitational pull instantly seizing the surrounding environment and anything caught within its grasp. Moments later, the members of the Color Gang found themselves helplessly dragged into the abyss, their surprised cries swallowed by the void. As his men were pulled away, the Color Gang leader desperately tried to maintain order, shouting for them to calm down and recognize the dark magic at play. He commanded them to attack the brat, who had evaded their magic. Despite his efforts, the leader soon found himself sprawled on the ground, injured, yet still bellowing at his remaining subordinates, demanding to know what was happening and what they were doing. His frustration boiled into a furious roar as he realized the extent of his defeat, unable to comprehend how a mere kid could have brought down his entire force. Meanwhile, Chris continued his relentless assault. After the dust settled, Chris stood amidst the wreckage, a trail of blood on his cheek. He wiped it away, his gaze sweeping over the defeated enemies as he quietly wondered if this was truly the full extent of their numbers. He then dismissed the notion of shadowy contributors as utterly meaningless, his expression a mix of weariness and disdain for the task he had just completed. Later, as he led a horse-drawn carriage, he reflected on his duties, feeling like a mere errand boy for the royal family. He acknowledged the immense power he possessed, a force that made him indispensable to their whims. He paused, turning to face an unseen observer, his eyes sharp and resolute. He declared that he possessed the strength to resist countless acts of violence, a silent challenge to anyone who might oppose him. His foot descended with brutal force, crushing the young man's head into the dirt. A guttural scream tore from the victim's throat as blood splattered across the ground, marking the swift and merciless end of the confrontation. The young man, terrified and desperate, managed to gasp out a warning, claiming to be a subordinate of Duke Noel's house. He pleaded with Chris not to harm him, asserting that the Noel family would not stand idly by. Chris's gaze remained cold and unwavering. Despite his pleas, Chris merely smirked, dark energy swirling around him. He declared that the young man would die first, then offered to be his opponent, a chilling promise of the inevitable. The terrified young man, slumped on the ground, could only stammer out questions, demanding to know Chris's identity and his motives. Chris, turning his back, simply stated, "I am evil." He then extended a bloodstained hand towards the horrified young man, a chilling smile gracing his lips as he added, "Just like you all." As the dark magic manifested, the words "dark hole" echoed under the full moon, signifying the activation of a powerful and destructive spell. Moments later, he strode through a grand, opulent hall, his expression alert and focused, having completed his grim task. Upon his arrival, a maid with light hair styled in twin buns, Maria Stella, greeted him, noting that he was supposed to be asleep. Chris acknowledged her presence with a quiet, "Maria." He remained silent, his gaze distant, as he reflected on his role, understanding that his master served this country, and he, in turn, served his master. Maria Stella, however, offered a gentle smile, stating that she was the first to greet him upon his return. She had greeted him with a knowing smile, and now, still bearing the marks of his recent conflict, Chris questioned how she could possibly know of his actions. Later, as Chris slept, Lady expressed her astonishment to young man too, remarking that she was surprised to learn of such a role existing within the Ark family. Suddenly, Maria Stella embraced him tightly, her voice soft as she urged him not to report his actions, acknowledging the burden he carried. She continued to hold him, explaining that his master and the country had been engaged in a prolonged struggle, a fight that had endured for a long time. Her voice filled with sorrow, Maria Stella lamented that the country remained so small and vulnerable, holding Chris close as he appeared to shed tears. Looking at his pained face, she questioned the adults who would force a child like him into such battles, her expression reflecting deep concern. Despite his concern for her, Maria Stella gently patted his back, reassuring him that she was perfectly fine and unharmed. Then, with a gentle firmness, she told him that his own heart was tattered and broken, a truth he seemed unable to perceive himself. His mind reeled from her words, and Chris reflected internally, wondering if the pain in his heart was gradually fading, if this was what it meant to become accustomed to such a life. Maria Stella then looked at him, her gaze piercing as she asked if he was truly absolute Sama. Chris, now with a faint, unsettling smile, responded that if that were the case, then he must be the strange one, for he could no longer feel the pain. He had declared his inability to feel pain, but Maria Stella, still in her maid uniform, did not deny his words. Instead, she urged him to rest, stating that there was still much to discuss, but that his master's words were wrong. She then offered to sleep with him, a gentle smile on her face. He, however, curtly refused, insisting he would sleep alone. Days later, Chris sat on a grand balcony with young man too, who inquired if he would participate in the martial arts tournament. Lady, her eyes sparkling with excitement, eagerly asked if Absolute Sama would enter, convinced that if he did, victory would be undeniable. Young man too explained that the tournament was for those under 15, and it would be an excellent opportunity to witness the abilities of their peers. Lady, still buzzing with anticipation, leaned forward, while Chris listened intently. He then added a significant detail. The hero was also rumored to be participating this year. Chris's eyes widened, a flicker of intense surprise, and perhaps something more profound crossing his face as he processed the revelation. Meanwhile, far from their conversation, a grand estate stood under the name of the Maria Marquis family in the country of Reincarnation. A young woman, seen from behind, hurried along a path. She stumbled, clutching her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she cried out in frustration, having finally found what she was looking for. The young woman, Alicia Marai, her face etched with anger and concern, demanded to know if Art had skipped class again. She stood on the cobblestone path, looking up at the young man lounging casually on a tree branch. He let out a drawn-out hum, seemingly unconcerned, even as he pondered the true nature of their adversaries. When she pressed him further, he simply stated that he just didn't feel like doing anything. This was Art, the hero. As the warm morning light enveloped the room, a young man stirred in his grand bed, slowly awakening to find a young woman lying beside him. He instinctively reached out, his hand brushing against her, and a soft sensation registered in his mind. The young woman, Maria, a maid of the Ark family, smiled gently at him, offering a polite "Good morning, master." As he wondered where she had learned such an intimate gesture, a sudden realization struck him, his eyes widening in utter shock and disbelief. He immediately demanded she leave, but she calmly reassured him, stating that her presence was acceptable as she considered herself like an older sister to him. Meanwhile, in the bustling kitchen of the Ark family estate, another maid named Wool entered, her demeanor cheerful as she began to happily wash dishes. She then turned to Maria, inquiring if their master had already returned to his room after finishing breakfast. Maria confirmed that he had. Maria observed Wool's exceptionally good mood, prompting Wool to exclaim that it was because master had given her chocolate. Maria acknowledged that the breakfast must have gone well, while Wool, still beaming, declared that she would never have known such a sweet and delicious thing existed if master hadn't given it to her. She wailed loudly, tears streaming down her face, lamenting that master had scolded her. Beside her, Art looked on with a shocked expression, clearly taken aback by her distress. Maria Stella explained to Art that she had informed him of the situation because she was worried. He acknowledged her words, understanding her reasoning. Internally, Maria Stella apologized to Wool, admitting her fault and revealing that she had used detection magic to eavesdrop on their earlier conversation, which had involved Art and Maria Stella in bed. She then expressed a quiet wish, hoping that master would rely on them a little more. His eyes, filled with a thoughtful gaze, reflected on her words, realizing that her kindness was also an extension of his own. Meanwhile, Wool, filled with renewed determination, declared her resolve to become stronger, strong enough to protect master with all her might. Elsewhere, in the bustling kitchen, Maria Stella informed another maid that she was scheduled to have a mock sword fight with master today, prompting Wool to excitedly exclaim her desire to join in. Maria Stella gently reminded Wool that she had already had a match yesterday and asked if she could have this one. She also inquired if Wool had other duties to attend to, causing Wool to pause in thought. She then urged Wool to get her work done quickly, to which Wool dutifully agreed. Moments later, Maria Stella stood ready, a practiced sword in hand, a confident smile gracing her lips as she declared to master that she would not lose today. With a swift movement, she lunged forward, her blade poised for attack. Art, standing firm, challenged her to come at him with all her might. She swung her sword with force, but Art met the blow, skillfully blocking her attack with his own weapon. He continued his mock sword fight against Maria Stella, his movements swift, but clearly struggling to keep pace with her superior skill. Despite his efforts, she effortlessly parried his attacks, her expression composed as she internally acknowledged his struggle, a surprising turn for someone expected to become a knight. Moments later, after being decisively defeated, he looked up at her with a determined glint in his eyes, pleading for just one more match. He pressed his request, his voice filled with earnestness, while she regarded him with a look of surprise, perhaps even a hint of concern. As the sparring continued in the background, Maria Stella's thoughts drifted, revealing her identity as a noble by birth. His persistence unwavering, he once again called out to Maria Stella, eagerly asking for another round. Her mind continued to wander, recalling her parents, a father who was an excellent knight, and a mother who, though strict, was full of love. She remembered their happy family life, which included her adorable younger brother, Orega, whom she cherished and would never dare to harm. However, such a peaceful existence was destined to be short-lived. Her flashback concluded with a somber image of her standing in a dimly lit room, gazing at her parents lying motionless in their bed, a profound tragedy having befallen them. She listened as her mother, with a heavy heart, spoke of her father and younger brother, Orega. Her mother then revealed the grim truth. Even powerful recovery magic proved ineffective against their affliction, and no cure could be found for the disease that ravaged her father. Desperate, she gazed at a framed image of her once joyful family, pleading internally that there had to be a way to save them. Despite their frantic efforts, borrowing vast sums of money and seeking treatments from the highest-ranking priests and potent potions, the disease claimed both her father and brother. With all three beloved family members gone, she was left with nothing but an overwhelming debt. Collapsed on the floor, her face etched with profound grief, she was utterly devastated. Yet, she could not simply follow them into death, for she felt an obligation to those who had lent money in their time of need, unwilling to repay their kindness with enmity. Even as someone questioned her resolve, she affirmed her determination, believing there was still something she could do to honor her family's memory and repay her debts. Among the few remaining assets was the real sword Stella, a magical heirloom she was meant to inherit from her father, now a desperate measure in her struggle. But even after letting go of everything, including the precious sword, she still could not repay the crushing debt. She, along with others, found herself chained, as a man acknowledged the unfortunate necessity of their situation. Her family's territory was subsequently returned to the country, and she, the last remaining member of her noble house, was sold into slavery. She, now clad in a maid's uniform, engaged in a fierce sword sparring match against a young man in a formal school-like uniform within the grand courtyard of a stately building. Their blades clashed with rapid, powerful strikes. He, the young man, reflected on his initial impression of her. When he first encountered her, he had found her an unpleasant child, despite her being around the same age as his deceased brother. But now, his perception had shifted. She, in turn, observed him closely during their spar. She found her master, who was hurt and tried to act strong while hiding his wounds, both saddening and lovable. Both continued their intense practice, their eyes sharp with focus and determination, each pushing the other to their limits. She deftly parried his attack, her sword deflecting his blade with a clang. She remarked that her master was quite a handful. Her gaze held a complex mix of emotions, a hint of weariness beneath her resolute expression. She confessed her frustration, stating that was her 10th consecutive loss. Despite her defeats, she acknowledged his swordsmanship, believing no one could beat him. He responded, agreeing with her assessment of his skill by calling himself a monster. However, he quickly added a humble caveat, suggesting that his father would easily surpass him. Maria Stella pondered the implications of Chris's words, realizing that as long as his father remained loyal to the royal family, they could not fully count on his allegiance. She found it particularly striking that Aprudo-sama, Chris, would voice such a concern. Meanwhile, Chris himself was deep in thought, reflecting that his father had not appeared in the original story, and that he knew nothing of his father's actions when the Ark family faced condemnation. He concluded that they should begin preparing for potential hostility. Suddenly, he questioned aloud, original story? He snapped out of his contemplation, apologizing for his momentary distraction and suggesting they continue their sparring. However, Maria Stella, smiling gently, told him he seemed tired and proposed they take a break on a nearby bench, revealing she had brought snacks. The two then settled onto a nearby bench, Chris looking somewhat surprised by the turn of events. She then offered him a snack, which he accepted. They both ate, Chris appearing a little flustered while Maria Stella maintained her warm smile. Observing him closely, Maria Stella noted that Master Chris did indeed seem tired, just as she had suspected. She then kindly offered her lap for him to rest upon. He, flustered, initially protested, insisting he was fine. Her gentle smile softened further as she reiterated her offer. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and perhaps a dawning realization, as Maria Stella continued to smile serenely. Her expression remained one of serene kindness, her gaze unwavering. Finally, he succumbed to the weariness, resting his head on Maria Stella's lap as she gently stroked his hair. He mused internally that he had seen this very training event in the original story before. He and his companions enjoyed a moment of leisure on a grand balcony, overlooking a serene landscape. Wool, lady, and young man too were present, engaged in conversation and refreshments. He then spoke, bringing up the topic of the martial arts tournament soon to be held in the royal capital. Wool stood nearby, holding a teapot, listening intently. His companions, lady and young man too, expressed their excitement, declaring they would certainly be attending. Wool, meanwhile, smiled contentedly, remarking on how delicious today's sweets looked. He clarified his stance, stating he would not be participating in the tournament himself. Lady, undeterred, confidently asserted that Aprudo-sama would undoubtedly win, her eyes sparkling with conviction. Suddenly, Wool stumbled, her eyes wide with surprise and a gasp escaping her lips, as if something unexpected had just occurred or been said. She quickly regained her balance, a small sigh of relief escaping her as she steadied herself, acknowledging that it had been a close call. Meanwhile, Chris watched with a knowing smile, his gaze sharp, while lady and young man too looked on with expressions of utter surprise, their mouths agape. He then declared his intention for Wool to participate in the tournament. Wool, holding a teacup, looked up at him with wide, questioning eyes, while young man too and lady turned their gazes to her, realizing the implication of Chris's words. Young man too wondered aloud if everyone was now looking at him, mistaking the focus. She questioned her own capabilities, asking if she wasn't weaker than her master, while Chris, seated opposite her, simply reiterated his desire for her to participate, leaving her to ponder his unexpected decision. She expressed her deep concern, her eyes welling with tears, fearing that her participation would only bring shame to her master. Her master, Chris, calmly dismissed her worries, reminding her that she had been trained by him, and there was no way she would lose to random opponents. Still, she hesitated, muttering a soft but. Then, Chris offered a powerful incentive. If she could defeat the descendant of the hero in the tournament, he would treat her to all the popular sweets from the royal capital on their way back. Her eyes widened in surprise, and a blush crept onto her cheeks. He pressed further, asking what else she desired if she were to win. Her previous doubts vanished, replaced by a fierce determination as she declared, "I'll do it." Lady, observing from a distance, noted that Wool was already thinking about winning. Wool, now beaming with excitement, eagerly listed her demands: new weapons and some cute clothes. Chris, with a resolute expression, affirmed his intention to show his master everything, from winning to becoming stronger and more useful. Wool's gaze hardened, reflecting a newfound resolve. Lady expressed her astonishment at Wool's sudden shift in enthusiasm. Wool, however, was unwavering, proclaiming with a bright smile that she would win. Chris, with a commanding presence, urged her to defeat the hero's descendant and claim all her desires. An elder maid, her face etched with a kind smile, inquired of a younger maid named Maria, asking how she had adjusted to her new position. Maria, with a thoughtful expression, began to respond, acknowledging that she was mostly accustomed to the work. The elder maid then expressed her relief, noting that Maria had ultimately been assigned only ordinary tasks, which was a comfort, as she had initially worried about the kind of unsavory duties Maria might be forced to perform. After a brief pause, the elder maid shifted the conversation, asking Maria about her master, Aprudo. Maria, however, seemed uncertain, her expression clouding with a hint of confusion as she admitted she did not know how things were going with him. Maria reflected on her master, observing that he was surprisingly quiet, a stark contrast to the other members of the Ark family. She confessed that at first, his silence had been the only thing that truly bothered her, but after watching him for several months, she found that her initial concerns had inexplicably faded. She continued her internal assessment, noting that while his expressions often lacked emotion, he occasionally revealed a face that told a story. Despite this, his speech remained respectful, though often carrying an invasive undertone. The elder maid interjected, offering a different perspective. She pointed out that despite the negative impressions others might have, Aprudo had never once raised a hand against servants or lower-ranking nobles. Meanwhile, two other young children, a boy and a girl, were seen smiling brightly, seemingly oblivious to the maid's conversation. Maria looked on, surprised, as the elder maid gently took her hand, reassuring her that everything was all right and urging her to remain exactly as she was. Suddenly, a sharp gasp escaped the elder maid's lips, causing Maria to spin around, her voice laced with concern as she demanded to know what was the matter. Maria's eyes widened in surprise as she witnessed Aprudo kneeling, gently tending to a young maid who sat on the floor amidst shattered pottery. Aprudo's expression was serious, while the young maid appeared distressed. Maria exclaimed in disbelief, a familiar thought crossing her mind. It's always like this. Unbeknownst to her, Aprudo internally mused that she was giving off the vibe of being a jerk. Maria found herself consumed by a thought, a silent frustration that echoed within her mind. Aprudo was truly going to drive her to her limits. A few months later, the grand estate continued its daily rhythm, though changes were quietly unfolding within its walls. The elder maid, seated comfortably, addressed Maria, asking if she intended to resign soon. Maria confirmed her departure, explaining that she had quickly mastered her duties and that Wool, a competent colleague, could now handle the cleaning tasks. She then earnestly requested Maria to continue caring for Aprudo. As their conversation continued, the elder maid looked at Maria with a knowing expression, asking if she felt any fear towards her master, Aprudo. The elder maid then admitted, with a slight tremor in her voice, that it would be dishonest to claim she herself had never been afraid. She continued, informing Maria that since she was officially becoming Aprudo's personal handmaiden, she had the right to inquire about his unique skill, known as absolute evil. Maria gasped, covering her mouth in shock as a terrible realization dawned on her. To possess a skill that evoked such a dreadful impression must be an immense burden. The elder maid explained that because of this skill, young Master Aprudo had become immersed in an atmosphere of utmost seriousness, rarely allowing himself to smile. Consequently, the servants of the Ark family, out of sympathy, often found themselves handling matters that were best kept hidden. She clasped her hands, her expression earnest, acknowledging that it was a significant request, especially given Maria's youth, but emphasized that it was their collective responsibility as adults. With a newfound resolve, Maria announced her intention to enter Aprudo's presence. As she walked away, the elder maid's voice followed her, pleading for her to continue supporting Aprudo. She stood before him, formally introducing herself as his new handmaiden, having taken over the duties from Imiti-sama. Aprudo, seated and engrossed in a book, acknowledged her presence. Maria then hesitated, her expression softening as she began to speak about his skills, mentioning that Imiti-sama had informed her. He turned his head slightly, his gaze averted, and asked if his skills bothered her. His hand clenched into a tight fist, betraying a hidden tension. Aprudo then declared with a fierce intensity that he was Aprudo Ark, and he cared little for the opinions of others, even if it meant everyone hated him. Yet, a flicker of vulnerability crossed his face as he admitted that deep down, he knew being seen through and judged by others could indeed change him. Maria, taken aback by the raw honesty and fierce resolve in his words, murmured that his determination was quite profound. As he turned away to gaze out the window, seemingly lost in thought, she observed him, a bittersweet and sad understanding dawning upon her. Her hands instinctively came together, reflecting on the immense burden he carried, to possess such strong determination and continue to live while constantly getting hurt. Moments later, she approached him from behind, gently wrapping her arms around his shoulders and holding his hands as he sat, still engrossed in his book. The sudden, unexpected contact caused Aprudo to flinch violently, his head snapping back in surprise as he cried out. He spun around, his eyes wide with shock and a flush of anger spreading across his face, demanding to know what she was doing and ordering her to get away from him. Maria's gaze softened, her eyes reflecting a deep concern as she thought of her young master. She vowed to him, embracing him tightly, that she would never let him be alone. From that moment on, she declared, she would be by his side as a slave, a handmaiden, and a sister, promising to heal the wounded heart of the clumsy and hurt boy. He responded by curtly instructing her to prepare his bath and get ready. Despite his words, Maria continued to hold him, prompting him to sigh in annoyance and tell her to let go, assuring her he understood. Then, with a bright smile, she asked if she should join him. He immediately recoiled, shouting a firm, "No, don't," in protest, while Maria looked on, seemingly unfazed. Later, as night fell, the quiet houses of the town stood under a starry sky. Far from the quiet house, a sinister figure emerged from the shadows, clutching a bundle of rope. With a menacing grin, they declared their intent to crush the Ark family by using them. Despite Aprudo's protests, the two eventually found themselves sharing a bath, with Maria gently attending to him. From a grand balcony overlooking a vast, ancient-looking arena, Aprudo, Girl A, and Boy A observed the unfolding events. The roar of the crowd echoed through the colossal structure, signaling the climax of a fierce battle. The arena floor lay silent for a moment, save for the distant murmurs of the spectators. A young man, Hero A, lay defeated, sprawled on the ground, while Wool stood victorious, her posture confident amidst the debris of the fight. As she approached the seated group, Wool's victory was met with a shared sense of relief and acknowledgement. Girl A, with a bright smile, expressed their collective surprise and satisfaction, stating that they had truly won. They began to dissect the battle, with Girl A noting that the opponent, Hero A, was weak and unable to fully utilize his skills. Boy A added that the hero's abilities were indeed troublesome, but Wool clarified her strategy, explaining that she knew his limitations and deliberately prevented him from landing a single hit, as even one successful strike would have meant their defeat. Aprudo then offered his concise conclusion, affirming that at this stage, Wool was undeniably the stronger combatant. After the match, the group, led by a stern-looking man, Butler B, walked through a stark, brick-lined corridor, their expressions thoughtful as they processed the recent events. They continued their assessment of Hero A, with Aprudo stating the necessity of keeping a close eye on him from now on. He acknowledged that even without the hero's full potential, if their levels had been closer, they could have lost. A deeper thought then emerged, revealing that in the original narrative, Hero A was weaker than Aprudo because he lacked the fundamental sense of a true fighter. Suddenly, Wool burst into the corridor, her face beaming with excitement. She called out to Aprudo, declaring her return and eagerly suggesting they celebrate with sweets and a shopping trip. Aprudo, with a gentle smile, raised a hand in acknowledgement. He gently patted Wool's head, commending her for her excellent performance and promising her a proper reward for her efforts. Her cheeks flushed slightly at his praise, a rare moment of bashfulness for the usually confident fighter. As they prepared to leave the arena, he encouraged her to fully enjoy their celebratory outing, assuring her there was no need to hold back. Meanwhile, in a quiet chamber, Alicia sat by the bedside of Hero A, also known as Ardo, who lay unconscious. She murmured in disbelief, grappling with the reality that even the hero had suffered a defeat. She reflected on Ardo's past overconfidence, recalling how he believed he could triumph with sheer power alone. A deep concern etched her features as she hoped this significant defeat would serve as a crucial lesson for him. Her frustration mounted as she considered the unfairness of her situation, constantly being scolded when Ardo neglected his duties, despite her being the one who diligently cared for him. She silently questioned why her father hadn't devised any countermeasures, instead leaving everything to Ardo. As Ardo stirred awake, Alicia rushed to his side, asking how he felt. Elsewhere, her father sat on a grand throne, pondering his own decision to take in the hero in the first place. He slowly processed his surroundings, a dawning realization settling upon him as he finally acknowledged his loss. Sitting up, Ardo declared to Alicia that he had made a decision, then asked her if he had gained anything from his recent experience. Alicia's face lit up with a hopeful smile, exclaiming that she had always believed in him and that he would one day fully understand his duty as a hero. She had just expressed hope for his future, but he, with a fierce, unwavering gaze, declared his intent to crush the Ark family. She looked at him, startled by his sudden, intense pronouncement, asking what he meant. He, sitting on the bed, explained that the rumors were true, the Ark family were scum. He recalled watching the girl in the finals, a memory that solidified his belief that nobles who would enslave and force a young girl to fight should not exist. Alicia reacted with a gasp of shock. She, still reeling, tried to reason with him, pointing out the recklessness of his ambition. Even as a hero, it was dangerous for a commoner like him to challenge high-ranking nobles like the Ark family. He, seemingly lost in his own thoughts, continued to ignore her warnings. She pressed him, asking if he was even listening, and emphasized that if he interfered with the Ark family, the Mirai family would be the ones to suffer the consequences. He, oblivious to her distress, turned to her with a wide, innocent smile, enthusiastically suggesting they bring down the Ark family together. She realized with a sinking feeling that he truly hadn't been listening to a word she said. He then looked at her with a softer, more earnest expression, admitting his frustration and that he couldn't defeat the Ark family alone. He added that he had her, Alicia, with him. She, overwhelmed by his naivety and the gravity of the situation, finally erupted, shouting at him not to joke around. She stood firm, hands on her hips, stating she would not ally with him based on such baseless claims. If he truly wanted her on his side, he needed to prepare a solid reason for the royal family and other high-ranking nobles, and gather a large army. Only then, she declared, would she support him. He looked up at her, listening intently this time. She, her eyes welling with tears, pleaded with him to stop messing with the Ark family until he met her conditions. She did not want the Mirai family to be destroyed because of him. She had laid out her conditions, and Ardo, now holding his sword, acknowledged her words. He understood she wanted him to gather soldiers from the royal family and high-ranking nobles to crush the Ark family, recognizing her distinct approach. He confirmed he understood. He then declared his resolve to carry out her wishes, addressing her directly with a determined smile. Meanwhile, a sudden, intense burst of light and energy erupted around Aprudo, startling him with its unexpected force. The source of this disturbance seemed to emanate from the royal castle itself. Back at the Maria residence, Aprudo sat in a formal room, listening as Michael informed him that he was being summoned to the royal castle. Michael confirmed the summons. Aprudo's thoughts immediately turned to the brat who had spoken at the party, recognizing the potential implications of this summons. As he walked through the castle halls with Maid Maria and Maid Elder, Aprudo internally mused that they could not afford to make an enemy of Michael, especially since Michael was likely the one who provided military support to the hero in the original story. He then addressed Wool, informing her that they were going to the royal castle because Prince Michael had summoned them. Wool reacted with a surprised huh. Her surprise quickly turned to alarm, as she frantically wondered if she had done something wrong and if she was going to be killed. Aprudo quickly reassured her, stating that she would not be killed. He speculated that Prince Michael probably liked her performance in the martial arts tournament and wished to take her in, or something similar. He had just received the summons, but the news left Wool in a state of profound distress, her eyes welling with tears as she questioned if she was being abandoned, if her master truly hated her. As Wool trembled, Maid Maria, observing the scene, advised her to refuse Prince Michael's offer if she did not wish to join his side. Aprudo, however, stepped forward, reassuring Wool that he would not let her go and would protect her with all his might. He affirmed that she belonged to him, a declaration that seemed to calm her fears, as she looked up at him with a glimmer of hope. Maid Maria watched their exchange, her expression unreadable. Soon after, Aprudo and Wool arrived at the Grand Royal Castle, where Prince Michael Lenana, the crown prince of the Lenana Kingdom, greeted them with a polite smile, commending Aprudo and pointedly referring to Wool as Slave Wool before inviting them to be seated. His gaze narrowed, a silent acknowledgement of Prince Michael's presence and the implications of his summons. As they took their seats, Aprudo immediately noticed the unusually large number of guards positioned around the room, prompting him to question the excessive security. The opulent chamber was indeed filled with a formidable presence of royal guards, and he voiced his concern, asking if such a vast number was truly necessary for mere protection. Prince Michael, maintaining his composed demeanor, explained that the guards were a necessity due to his position as the next in line to the throne, stating that any harm to him would be a disaster for the kingdom. He then politely requested their understanding for any discomfort the heavy security might cause. Aprudo simply acknowledged the explanation, but beside him, Wool let out a low, angry growl, her frustration evident despite his calm acceptance. His sharp eyes observed the guards, one of whom then spoke, stating that their business would be concluded swiftly, provided they complied quickly. He stood before Prince Michael, who imperiously demanded, "Give me your slave, then you will be dismissed." Aprudo, however, met the demand with a firm refusal. Unfazed by the prince's dismissal, he simply stated, "Is that all you have to say? Then we'll be leaving," turning to depart with Wool. As they turned to leave, the royal guards, already present in force, began to draw their swords, their blades glinting menacingly. Prince Michael, observing this, questioned Aprudo's intentions, asking what he was trying to do and why the guards were drawing their weapons. Wool, her eyes narrowed with fierce anger, commanded him to sheath his swords, issuing a stark warning that there would be no second chance. Prince Michael merely covered his face, a mocking laugh escaping him. He then openly mocked the infamous Ark family, expressing disbelief at their foolishness and challenging Aprudo to consider what he could possibly do against such a multitude of guards. His expression twisted into a sneer as he declared that a fool like Aprudo clearly needed to be taught a lesson. His words were followed by a direct taunt to Wool, asking if she would come to him, implying he would spare her if she abandoned Aprudo. Her eyes, however, burned with an intense fury, her teeth gritted in silent defiance. Just as her anger threatened to erupt, Aprudo firmly grasped her arm, a silent gesture of restraint and reassurance. He offered a calm, almost serene smile, while Wool, emboldened by his presence, defiantly declared her unwavering loyalty, asserting that she belonged to her master and that he would never be defeated by people like Prince Michael. Her bold declaration shattered Prince Michael's composure, his face contorting into a mask of pure rage as he shrieked for them to die and get lost. Amidst the prince's outburst, Aprudo calmly explained the unfolding events, stating that Prince Michael would be killed by his own guards for drawing swords against him, adding cryptically, "That's the storyline." The prince, momentarily stunned by this unexpected pronouncement, could only scratch his head in confusion, wondering what Aprudo meant. A sudden, horrifying realization dawned upon him, his eyes widening in terror as he frantically screamed for his guards. In a horrifying twist, the very guards he had summoned, instead of turning on Aprudo and Wool, began to attack each other with savage cries of "Kill them!" and "Yes!", their blades clashing in a sudden, brutal melee. The guards continued their inexplicable assault, one of them twisting in agony as dark tendrils erupted from his form, while another stood frozen in shock. Amidst the chaos, one of the affected guards, seemingly under Aprudo's influence, issued a chilling command to Wool, instructing her to call for aid and spread the word that Prince Michael had lost his mind, ordering the assassination of the Ark family's heir. Prince Michael, witnessing this blatant manipulation, recoiled in utter disbelief. As the false narrative took hold, the guards' internal conflict intensified, their forms still writhing with the dark tendrils of Aprudo's influence as they violently turned their weapons upon one another. Aprudo, observing the unfolding chaos he had orchestrated, took decisive action, delivering a powerful kick that sent one of the disoriented guards sprawling across the floor. Will watched him, her expression unreadable. The consequences of Aprudo's actions were immediate and brutal. Blood splattered as the guards' hands were severed, their bodies collapsing to the ground. Aprudo stood over them, his voice cold as he reminded them. "I warned you, didn't I?" His gaze unwavering. Aprudo delivered a final, chilling declaration, asserting that there would not be a second opportunity for such defiance. Prince Michael, utterly terrified by the display of power, desperately tried to halt Aprudo's advance, stammering his name, W8. Aprudo, Arkansas. Aprudo, however, continued his relentless approach, stepping casually over the severed hand of a fallen guard. As Aprudo loomed over him, Prince Michael, despite his palpable fear, attempted to appeal to reason, questioning Aprudo's intent. He argued that Aprudo would not dare to kill the heir of a high-ranking noble merely for the sake of a slave. Aprudo, however, remained unmoved by Prince Michael's pleas, looking down at him with an indifferent expression and feigning an inability to hear his words. The prince's fear quickly transformed into seething rage, his eyes shadowed and teeth clenched in a silent snarl of fury. He erupted in a furious outburst, his face contorted with rage, condemning Aprudo's attitude, his very existence, and especially his eyes, declaring his intense dislike for them. His anger continued to boil over, as he further insulted Aprudo, calling him an eyesore. Meanwhile, Aprudo simply observed the prince's tantrum, his expression calm and unbothered, before stating that he understood. He then stood over the terrified Prince Michael, reminding him that he had attempted to kill him, and questioned if the prince knew what happened next, hinting at the activation of a skill known as King's Dominion. As he walked away, Prince Michael clutched his throat, gasping for air, a look of utter terror and confusion on his face, struggling to comprehend what was happening. Just then, a new figure, the king himself, entered the chamber, accompanied by maid Maria, and immediately commanded an end to the conflict. The king, his face stern and authoritative, bellowed for both sides to drop their swords, his presence commanding immediate attention. Aprudo, however, turned to face the newly arrived monarch with a disarming smile, casually asking his majesty how he was. The king, taken aback by Aprudo's casual demeanor and the chaotic scene, stood in stunned silence, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple, questioning the true intentions behind this unexpected appearance. Prince Michael recounted a past event, stating that Ardo had drawn his sword against him, which resulted in the royal guards killing him. He concluded, asserting that was the true story. Meanwhile, in the recounted memory, a shadowy figure commanded the guards to kill, and they responded with a unified, "Yes, sir," as they raised their weapons. Elsewhere, Father Elisha observed the unfolding events with a look of deep concern etched upon his face. His hand held a small, dark device, from which a holographic projection shimmered, displaying the very scene of the shadowy figure and the guards. The projection continued to play, revealing the chaotic confrontation, prompting a voice to question the nature of this unexpected footage. Aprudo, holding the device, explained that he had recorded the entire incident with a magic tool, just in case. As the footage concluded, the king sat with a stern expression, his gaze fixed on Aprudo, who stood before him alongside Ardo and maid Maria. The king then addressed Aprudo by his full name. He then bowed his head in a gesture of profound regret, offering his apologies to Aprudo for the events that had transpired. He listened as the king explained that the Ark family had always supported the royal family, even resorting to unsavory methods to ensure the country was run properly. Aprudo, however, countered that he never expected such loyalty to be repaid in this manner. His eyes widened in shock as he pressed the king, asking if the recent incident was a deliberate decision by the royal family. He declared that if it were, the Ark family would be forced to reconsider its long-standing position with the crown. A subtle, knowing smile played on Aprudo's lips as the king, visibly distressed, turned away, beads of sweat forming on his brow. The king, still sweating and looking downcast, finally confessed that it was not a royal decree, but rather Prince Michael's uncontrolled rampage. He admitted his disbelief that the situation had escalated to such a point. Lying in a bed, bandaged from his injuries, the king questioned Aprudo's actions, asking if severing the guard's arm was truly necessary, and if a more peaceful resolution couldn't have been found. Aprudo, his expression firm, reminded the king that despite any claims of self-defense, he had attacked a high-ranking noble. Turning his back to the king, Aprudo asserted that blaming him was misplaced. He argued that the royal guard bore the true fault for ignoring the warnings and failing to correct Prince Michael's mistake, even if it meant sacrificing their own lives. He then looked directly at the king, demanding to know how the royal family intended to take responsibility for these events. With Maria covering her eyes beside him, Aprudo listed the king's transgressions, summoning a high-ranking noble, attempting to forcibly enslave his maid, and finally, attempted murder. He warned that such crimes, if judged, would result in a life sentence in the dungeon. The king, looking distraught, offered compensation to Aprudo and his maid, and proposed placing Prince Michael under house arrest, asking if this was an acceptable resolution. Aprudo, unwavering, countered with a firm demand. At the very least, Prince Michael must be removed from his position as heir. The king reacted with a gasp of profound shock. He stood firm as the king, his face etched with distress, pleaded for reconsideration, stating that Michael was his only son and that without an heir, the royal family would face ruin. Aprudo calmly countered that another option existed. He then proposed that if Princess Haniel were to marry, the succession problem could be resolved, suggesting this would be a better solution than making Michael the crown prince. The king, considering this, conceded that Haniel was indeed more capable than Michael. However, the king quickly pointed out a critical impediment. Haniel was blind and, in that state, could not handle official duties. Aprudo acknowledged the king's observation about Haniel's condition, but asserted that finding a way to overcome such challenges was a matter for his majesty and his advisors to resolve. He then reiterated his full demand: compensation for himself and his maid, and the removal of Prince Michael from his position as crown prince. The king, his face contorted with stress and beads of sweat forming on his brow, was reminded that the ultimate decision rested solely with him. Moments later, the scene shifted to the elegant, glass-domed exterior of a grand conservatory, bathed in sunlight. Inside the opulent conservatory, Aprudo and maid Maria sat at a small table, surrounded by lush greenery and ornate furnishings, a tea set, and an array of pastries laid out before them. Maid Maria's eyes widened with utter surprise and delight, a flush spreading across her cheeks as she gazed at the lavish spread. She hesitantly asked Aprudo if such indulgence was truly permissible. He reassured her, explaining that it was compensation from the king, and encouraged her to eat as much as she desired without any concern. Aprudo, still seated, listened as Maria expressed her concern, asking if making an enemy of the prince would not create significant problems. He then turned to her, questioning why she had protected him. Her eyes wide with alarm, Maria explained that making an enemy of the prince was akin to making an enemy of the entire kingdom of Lanana. He then revealed that the royal family had attempted to take Maria from the Ark family, despite their sworn loyalty, by threatening them. With a slight smile, he dismissed her concerns, stating it was nothing new. Maria looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and dawning understanding. The narrative shifted, revealing a harsh truth. Wool had always been alone, sold into servitude because she was deemed weak and useless, even as a servant. In the present, Aprudo knelt before Maria, offering her a hand amidst scattered debris, a gesture of comfort and support. The grand, ornate architecture of the royal palace stood as a silent witness to the unfolding drama within its walls. Inside the opulent hall, the king sat upon his throne, a stern expression etched upon his face. Beside him, Butler A stood with an air of quiet authority. Below, Prince Michael knelt before two vigilant guards, the scene set for a formal inquiry. The king's gaze fell upon Michael, his voice resonating with a stern query, demanding to know if he truly understood the gravity of his actions. He, looking defiant, asserted that Aprudo was the one in the wrong, claiming he had no choice but to fight back after being attacked first. Michael expressed disbelief, questioning how such evidence could exist, as Butler A presented a holographic projection displaying footage of the incident. The butler challenged him to maintain his stance after witnessing the undeniable proof. The king then declared that Michael had committed an irreversible act, emphasizing the severity of his transgression, which was revealed to be evidence provided by Aprudo. Michael, still kneeling, vehemently blamed Aprudo, accusing him of ruining his 10th birthday party and calling him a coward. His anger escalated as he shouted that his actions were merely an attempt to teach Aprudo a lesson. The king, looking weary, corrected Michael, reminding him that the Duke's faction was responsible for the incident, not the Ark family. He declared that Prince Michael had committed a crime, but Michael vehemently rejected the accusation, asserting that the Ark family was the true victim in the matter. He then delivered his decree, informing Michael that he would be stripped of his title as crown prince. Michael, visibly distraught, protested the decision, to which the king coldly responded that he should be grateful, as normally such an offense would result in imprisonment. He continued his vehement protests, falling to his knees and exclaiming that the demand for him to step down as crown prince was utterly ridiculous, while guards stood by, observing the scene. The king, however, considered the broader implications, realizing that imprisoning Michael would spell the end of the royal family. He offered a conditional path to reinstatement. If Michael were to reflect on his actions, show the incriminating footage to all nobles, and publicly apologize to Aprudo, they might reconsider. He then dismissed Michael, who still attempted to argue. He then sternly reiterated his command, asking if Michael had not heard him tell him to leave. Michael, defeated, offered a quiet apology and departed. Once alone, he sat in contemplation, lamenting that Michael was still a child. He had hoped his son would mature over time, but he never expected such recklessness. Later, he conferred with his trusted advisors, including Butler A and Butler B, on the pressing issue of making Princess Haniel the new crown princess. Butler A inquired about their next course of action. He then proposed a bold solution, engaging Haniel to the Ark family, a suggestion that visibly surprised Butler A. As the king pondered this, his advisors offered further counsel. Butler B suggested that marrying into the royal family would also serve as a reward for the Ark family, and asked if they should proceed in that direction. However, Butler A quickly interjected, urging the king to wait, pointing out that opposing Duke Zen, who supported Michael, would create an enemy, but making an enemy of the Ark Marquette, especially Aprudo, was far more dangerous for the country. Despite the king's recent pronouncements, Prince Michael found himself in a state of conflicted emotion. He acknowledged someone's wonderful qualities, yet confessed internally that their situation was a bit frustrating for him, a blush rising to his cheeks as hearts seemed to flutter around his thoughts. As these complex emotions lingered within him, the scene shifted to a different part of the grounds where a young girl, Wool, now 13 years old, stood with a confident grin, holding a staff. She called out to Maria, declaring it was her turn, then turned to Michael, eagerly requesting to spar with him next, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. The young aristocrat, Aprudo, stood poised with a sword, his gaze sharp and resolute, embodying the spirit of a villainous noble. He mused that a bath was the ideal setting for deep contemplation, a necessary ritual for any villainous aristocrat. Indeed, the passage of time had brought Aprudo to his 15th year, a significant milestone in his journey. As he stepped through the grand entrance of the academy in the royal capital, the true narrative, Tales of the Linana Country, was finally set to unfold. Later, as he soaked in the bath, a maid offered to wash his back, but he politely declined, asking if she had already finished her own bathing. Despite his usual preference for bathing alone, the maid insisted, declaring that she had decided she would be the one to wash his back. She then playfully suggested that it was acceptable for him to be a little naughty, while the chronicler noted that this was the story of a man reincarnated as Aprudo Arc, a villainous aristocrat from a fantasy novel, who was desperately trying to alter his predetermined future. He dismissed her concerns, but she explained that tomorrow was an important day for him, and she simply wanted to take extra care of him today. She vehemently refused his attempts to push her away, insisting that she, his big sister, would handle everything for him, despite his plea for her not to claim. Aprudo stood once more, sword in hand, as the narrative hinted at a pivotal moment where the blades of father and son would cross, determining the fate of a noble. He confirmed his understanding as the man explained the Arc family's unique magic spell, spirit summoning, a power passed down since the first head of the family forged a bond with the Spirit King. This inheritance, he continued, demanded the death of the current owner and the forceful acquisition of the spirit crest embedded within their very being. Viren, the man, then declared that he had no intention of being killed without a fight, sternly instructing Aprudo to prepare himself for the impending confrontation. Aprudo met his father's gaze, his voice firm as he affirmed his readiness for the challenge. As his father stood before him, Aprudo's thoughts raced, realizing the Arc family's history was thoroughly steeped in blood. He understood then why Viren had been absent from the original story. He must have already perished due to this brutal method of inheritance. The two men stood opposite each other in a grand hall, swords drawn. Aprudo recalled that the last time they had sparred was when he was merely 10 years old. His eyes, sharp and resolute, fixed on his father, betraying no hesitation. Viren's own gaze was equally stern, a silent acknowledgement of the grim task ahead. With a sudden, explosive burst of dark energy, Aprudo lunged forward, initiating the deadly ritual. Above Viren, a swirling void began to manifest, a dark hole opening in the space above him, threatening to consume all. Aprudo stood firm, his sword drawn, as shadowy, claw-like tendrils erupted from the ground around him, reaching towards the light that pierced the darkness. With a fierce cry, he unleashed a devastating attack, a torrent of dark energy manifesting as a black flame slash that tore through the very fabric of the space before him. A moment later, a look of surprise and concern crossed his face as he realized the immense power he wielded. His combat level, he understood, now exceeded 90. He reflected on this revelation, knowing that the average level of soldiers in this world was merely 20, and even in the original story, characters above level 50 were considered exceptionally rare. His internal assessment solidified. His power certainly exceeded level 50, a fact underscored by the shattered fragments of the environment around him, remnants of his unleashed strength. Meanwhile, Viren, observing Aprudo's display, acknowledged his son's strength from a parental perspective. However, he cautioned that the true difference between them lay in the countless life-or-death situations he had endured, a harsh truth for someone so young. Having made his point, Viren declared it was his turn to attack and lunged forward with astonishing speed, his sword poised. He delivered a swift, powerful sword strike, aiming directly at Aprudo. Despite the incredible speed of the assault, Aprudo reacted instantly, blocking Viren's blade with his own, his face etched with intense concentration. The impact sent Aprudo skidding backward, his feet dragging across the floor, yet he held his ground. Viren, a slight smile playing on his lips, acknowledged that his son had indeed managed to block his strike. He lay on the ground, his sword cast aside, as Aprudo descended with a powerful downward strike. Well then, Aprudo thought, still in motion, he launched himself through the air, sword drawn, preparing another swift attack. He unleashed a powerful strike, demanding, "How about this?" Viren, still prone, managed to block the blow, but the sheer force of it shattered the wall behind him. He gazed at the shattered wall, the immense power of Aprudo's strike undeniable. He had known his son was strong, having protected the Linana kingdom from the shadows for many years, but he had never imagined such a profound extent of his capabilities. Aprudo, meanwhile, knelt, poised for the next move. Recovering his stance, he rose and declared that they were just getting started, acknowledging Aprudo's expected prowess. Aprudo, with a focused gaze, considered that perhaps he should get a little more serious. His eyes widened, reflecting a surge of power and intense focus. Viren struggled, grunting with effort as he attempted to defend himself from another rapid assault. Aprudo delivered a series of rapid, powerful blows, forcing his father to defend desperately, his face contorted in strain. The relentless assault continued, culminating in Viren being knocked to the ground, with Aprudo standing over him, sword still drawn. The ground shattered violently, a testament to the immense power unleashed by Aprudo's final strike. He stood firm amidst the debris, his gaze sharp and unwavering, while Viren, his face contorted in a mix of shock and pain, struggled to maintain his footing, his sword still drawn. Viren, sweat beading on his brow, managed a strained smile, acknowledging Aprudo's growth and strength. He watched as Viren finally succumbed, dropping to one knee, defeated. Still, Viren, his voice raw with emotion, urged him to surpass him, declaring this the final blow of their contest. In response, Aprudo raised his hand, initiating the unique magic spell known as spirit summoning, calling forth the spirit of creation from the swirling energies around him. Moments later, the spirit of creation materialized, a magnificent female figure with long, flowing hair, appearing to rest in a serene slumber. Aprudo stood nearby, observing his summoned entity. Elsewhere, a young woman with wide, tear-filled eyes watched, her expression a mixture of awe and distress. Aprudo, his gaze intense, then spoke of a dark hole, hinting at a deeper power or technique. Later, he sat opposite Viren in a formal room, the two men now engaged in a calm discussion, the intensity of their earlier battle replaced by a quiet contemplation. He questioned Viren, asking why he had saved him, knowing that the unique magic could only be inherited upon Viren's death. Viren, looking out a window, reflected on the cruelty of someone sacrificing their life just to pass on a unique magic spell, acknowledging that he had already sacrificed his life for the country. Aprudo, facing his bandaged father, declared that he did not desire power gained through such a sacrifice. As Aprudo turned away, Viren mused internally that in the original story, Aprudo likely would not have hesitated to inherit such power, as death had become commonplace for him. Aprudo then revealed he had considered the dilemma, acknowledging Viren's point that he could not contract with the spirit unless Viren died. He proposed an alternative, asking his father to allow him to form a contract with the spirit Viren had summoned, suggesting they consider this an inheritance ceremony. He explained that, unlike the unique magic, he would only be able to use the contracted spirit. Viren considered the implications, knowing that contracting with a high-ranking spirit demanded enormous magical power, while Aprudo continued to explain that he would inherit the unique magic after Viren passed away from old age. Viren, stroking his chin thoughtfully, conceded that Aprudo should be capable of such a feat. A slight smile touched Viren's lips as he stated that the loser must obey the winner. Viren then confirmed that Aprudo would form a contract with one of the three spirits he could summon under the direct control of the Spirit King, asking if he was ready. Aprudo, extending his hand, affirmed his readiness. He considered the spirit of devotion, a being specialized in support, capable of expanding magic range, enhancing physical abilities, and inspiring devotion. Viren stood nearby, observing the interaction. Viren clarified that while spirits could comprehend human speech, they were unable to vocalize in the human realm. Aprudo then directly addressed the spirit, inquiring about its name. With a gentle smile, he bestowed upon the spirit the name Toa. He then asked Toa if she could reduce her size, and the spirit promptly complied, shrinking to a more diminutive form. Viren observed that, despite not being a direct inheritance, Aprudo had certainly gained the power of a spirit, a power he would fully command upon his graduation from the academy in 3 years. Aprudo, with a determined expression, humbly accepted this path, declaring his intention to become the head of the Ark family and to overcome all future hardships with the new power he had gained. The grand royal castle stood majestically within the Lenana kingdom, a symbol of power and history. Within its walls, a man with dark hair, Aprudo, greeted another, the king, with a wry smile, stating he had merely failed to die. The king, extending a hand, expressed his profound relief at their reunion and, above all, that Aprudo was alive. They then solidified their reunion with a firm handshake, a gesture of mutual respect, and perhaps a shared past. Now seated comfortably, Aprudo reflected on his survival, despite having killed many, even his own father, a fate he never expected. The king, however, quickly interjected, urging him not to dwell on such grim thoughts. The king continued, praising Aprudo for his numerous acts of assistance, simply for being his childhood friend, and acknowledged the Ark family's unparalleled contributions to the country. Aprudo responded with a subtle smile, reiterating his happiness that the king was alive. Later, as a maid served tea, the king revealed his true desire, for Michael and Viren to foster a relationship with Aprudo, mirroring the bond he himself shared with him. He lamented that Michael's inferiority complex and prejudice made a good relationship with Aprudo impossible, acknowledging that even from his own perspective as king, Aprudo was truly exceptional. Turning his attention back to Aprudo, the king then posed a significant question, asking if he had considered an engagement between Aprudo and his daughter, Haniel. He burst into laughter, a sound filled with surprise and perhaps a hint of disbelief, as the king's words settled upon him. The king, observing his reaction, mused that he had once considered leaving everything to him after his own demise, then offered a quick apology for forgetting his own mortality. Aprudo, meanwhile, remained composed, though his thoughts revealed a weariness with the clandestine tasks he performed for the royal family and the nation. He continued, speculating that once Aprudo assumed leadership of the Ark family, he would likely cease to involve himself in royal matters that did not directly pertain to his own house. Aprudo, holding a cup, affirmed that the era of behind-the-scenes work would conclude with his generation, then posed a pointed question. Could the royal family truly offer a reward substantial enough to satisfy him? The grand edifice of the Lenana Royal Academy stood majestically, its spires reaching towards the sky, a beacon of learning within the kingdom. Students moved through the academy grounds, their figures small against the imposing architecture, as a horse-drawn carriage waited nearby. Moments later, Aprudo was seen entering a luxurious carriage, a coachman respectfully bidding him a good day. Nearby, a girl with dark hair, neatly tied with a bow, offered a simple, affirmative response. Later, he walked through the academy grounds, accompanied by a group of fellow students, including a blonde girl with an elaborate hairstyle. The towering spires and intricate stonework of the academy's main building dominated the skyline, a testament to its enduring legacy. He stood among a group of students as one of them began to explain the details regarding the day's entrance exam. The student, a blonde young man, elaborated that the exam would encompass magic, close combat, and written tests, with results determining class divisions from A to D. He then revealed that they had already instructed their subordinates not to achieve low scores or hinder Lord Aprudo. He continued, urging everyone to be careful not to tarnish Lord Aprudo's name, and added that Prince Michael, the descendant of the hero, and the saint would also be enrolling this year. Finally, the blonde student encouraged Aprudo to do his best, to which he responded with a resolute, affirmative declaration. He and the blonde student then observed a tall, veiled woman in a black habit, who the student identified as the saint. The blonde student remarked on her mysterious aura, while Aprudo's gaze remained fixed on her, his thoughts already racing. He recognized her as Elizabeth the Saint, one of the original heroines, a key player behind the scenes. In the original story, she possessed superior healing skills, specifically regeneration, which allowed her to repeatedly heal the fatally wounded hero and send him back to the front lines. She also continuously raised the morale of soldiers with her beauty and an incitement skill. He continued to ponder Saint Elizabeth, noting that she rarely left the church, suggesting she would be quite naive about the world. Despite this, her level of danger was on par with the hero's. As he considered this, he and the blonde student spotted another young woman, Lady Alicia, the hero's fiancée. Aprudo realized the hero was not with her and resolved that he needed to act before she, too, fell into the hero's way of thinking. The blonde student then confirmed that the hero was exempt from the academy entrance exam, explaining why he likely would not be present today. He considered Lady Alicia's future, realizing she would likely face even greater challenges at the academy. He sighed, acknowledging that the hero, despite being a commoner, would enter through a royal recommendation and be treated as a quasi-nobleman. Moments later, a large group of examinees, including Aprudo, gathered before the grand steps of the academy. An examiner addressed them, welcoming them all to the test. The examiner continued, explaining that the test would evaluate their maneuvering, magic, and sword techniques. From that point on, they would engage in one-on-one mock battles with randomly selected opponents. He instructed them to wait for their names to be called, clarifying that each match would continue until one of the opponents stepped out of bounds or an examiner stopped it. With that, his instructions concluded. As the practical exams began, Lady Alicia stepped onto the field, her eyes gleaming with determination as she prepared for her turn. Her opponent, a male student, found himself overwhelmed, cursing in frustration as he struggled to get close, blocked by a relentless barrage of ice shards. Nearby, Michael watched the unfolding battle with wide-eyed shock, while Aprudo observed with a calm, knowing expression. The male student grunted in exertion, desperately trying to defend himself against the continuous assault of ice magic. His foot slid precariously, indicating he was on the verge of being forced out of the designated combat area. The male student cried out in defeat as Alicia, maintaining her confident smile, held up her hand, her ice magic securing her victory. Aprudo, witnessing her impressive display, mused internally that she had indeed grown incredibly strong after receiving his magical instruction. He watched intently as Lady Alicia, with a swift motion, conjured sharp ice shards that erupted from the ground, forcing her opponent back. Aprudo mused that such a display was merely a natural outcome for someone of her caliber. Moments later, the match concluded. The examiner's voice echoed, declaring the opponent had stepped out of bounds. Lady Alicia was the victor, earning her the title of Lady Cruel from the crowd. As she ascended the steps, returning from her decisive victory, Lady Alicia addressed Aprudo, announcing her return. He met her with a subtle smile, acknowledging her newfound strength and reiterating the moniker, Lady Cruel. His praise, however, caused her to blush deeply. She clasped her hands together, expressing her honor at receiving his commendation and her pride in having fought in a manner that upheld his name. The unexpected praise left her utterly flustered, her cheeks flushed as she tried to compose herself. Michael, standing nearby, offered his congratulations for a good performance. Alicia, still a bit overwhelmed, then noticed Chris, another student, and greeted him. Chris, in turn, encouraged Aprudo to do his best in his upcoming match. A subtle tension hung in the air as Michael, Aprudo, and Alicia stood together, the weight of the ongoing exams palpable. Breaking the silence, Alicia, with renewed enthusiasm, inquired about Aprudo's next opponent. She speculated whether it might be someone from the Duke Noir's family, or perhaps Lady Alicia from Marquis Marai's family. Michael, considering the possibilities, added that there was also a chance it could be the Saintess herself. As the examiner announced the next match, Aprudo arc, students in the stands continued to speculate. They reasoned that since most of the upper-class noble examinees were young ladies, his opponent would inevitably be someone from the Noir or Arc families. He received enthusiastic encouragement from the students. One young man wished him success, while a young woman cheered him on, urging him to do his best. As the announcement continued, the mention of the Noir family sent a ripple of unease through the observing students. They recalled the family's role as leaders among the nobles who had caused trouble at Prince Michael's commemoration party, their expressions turning to shock and dismay. Aprudo remained stoic, listening intently. The focus shifted to Tristan Noir, a figure whose abilities, rumor suggested, far surpassed others in the Noir family, despite his reputation as a black sheep. His involvement in the current events was uncertain, as he had not featured prominently in the original story. Tristan Noir then made his entrance into the grand arena, his presence commanding attention from the assembled students. Aprudo's expression hardened into a look of surprise and concern as he processed the implications of the announcement. Beside him, the two students who had offered encouragement earlier also reacted with visible shock. Moments later, Aprudo stood on the arena floor, facing not only Tristan Noir, but also Lady Alicia and Saint Elizabeth, who had also been called forward. The unexpected gathering created a tense atmosphere. Tristan Noir observed the others with a subtle smirk, while Lady Alicia looked on with a mix of surprise and apprehension. Saint Elizabeth, however, maintained her serene composure, her expression unreadable. Tristan Noir then addressed the group with a polite yet unsettling greeting, acknowledging Miss Alicia, the Saintess, and Mr. Aprudo. His gaze then shifted to the examiner, demanding an explanation for the unusual situation. The examiner, standing between Lady Alicia and Saint Elizabeth, confirmed that mock battles were indeed supposed to be one-on-one according to the rules. However, he explained that since the Saintess specialized in support during combat, they had determined that a solo evaluation would not properly assess her true value. Therefore, the examiner declared, as a special exception, this battle would be conducted as a 2-on-2. He then paused, his gaze sweeping over the participants, before announcing that he would reveal the pairs. The examiner declared the first pair for the mock battle, Aprudo Arc and Lady Alicia Marai. He then announced their opponents would be Tristan Noir and Saint Elizabeth, the Saintess. Aprudo, now paired with Alicia, mused that this arrangement was quite helpful, as it would allow him to observe the Saintess's powers, which he might not have seen if he had been directly pitted against her. Alicia, however, appeared visibly distressed by the pairing. Alicia then turned to Aprudo, introducing herself as Alicia Marai and noting that it was their first time speaking. Aprudo acknowledged her, then immediately inquired about their respective roles in the upcoming battle. She explained that she could only use magic and would therefore be attacking from a distance. He instructed her to attack Tristan with magic until he was within the range of his sword, assuring her she didn't need to do anything else as he would handle Tristan directly. Alicia, surprised by his direct approach, questioned if such a strategy was truly acceptable, especially considering the Saintess's inability to fight and the potential need for her magical support, while Aprudo engaged Tristan. Aprudo, however, dismissed her concerns, stating that while they mustn't overlook the Saintess's support abilities, it was not an elegant way to overwhelm an opponent with sheer numbers. He observed that despite any support the Saintess might provide, Tristan was essentially fighting alone. He further elaborated on his combat philosophy, stating his dislike for overpowering opponents with numbers and his preference for dividing roles to facilitate one-on-one engagements. Alicia listened intently, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and dawning understanding as Aprudo laid out his unconventional strategy. She bowed her head, expressing deep regret and admitting her misunderstanding. Such behavior, she mused, was indeed unbecoming of a proud upper-class noble. Her resolve solidified. She declared her understanding and willingness to follow Aprudo's lead, urging them to fight with pride. She confirmed her understanding with a small, knowing smile. Aprudo, in turn, reminded her not to target the Saintess directly. With the final instructions given, the examiner declared the mock battle ready to begin, the vast arena filled with spectators awaiting the clash between the two pairs. As the command to begin echoed, Tristan Noir launched himself forward, a blur of motion across the ground. Simultaneously, Alicia Marai unleashed a powerful fireball, a swirling orb of dark energy forming in her hand before hurtling towards her opponent. He continued his relentless charge, closing the distance with incredible speed. Meanwhile, Saint Elizabeth, standing calmly, began to chant, activating her support magic. She invoked Defense Increase and automatic healing magic, preparing to bolster her ally against the incoming assault. Tristan Noir met Alicia's fireball head-on, the magical explosion engulfing him in a burst of energy and smoke. Yet, as the smoke began to clear, Tristan emerged, seemingly unharmed, his form still intact. Alicia gasped in disbelief, exclaiming that her attack had indeed connected. Aprudo, however, remained stoic, simply stating, "No." With a resounding impact, his foot slammed onto the ground, kicking up debris and emphasizing his continued advance. He remained utterly unfazed, his expression calm and undisturbed, even after enduring a direct magical assault. Despite the impact, he continued his relentless charge forward, prompting Chris to exclaim in disbelief, wondering what was happening with him. Aprudo, observing the scene from the stands, felt a growing unease. He silently urged himself not to jump to conclusions, yet the sight of Tristan's resilience was deeply unsettling, suggesting a potentially ominous turn for the mock battle. Meanwhile, Saint Elizabeth, her gaze fixed on Tristan, calmly considered her options. She wondered if she should employ her skill, incitement, to eliminate his fear, pondering if the events were indeed taking an ominous turn. Amidst a chaotic mock battle where combatants clashed with fierce intensity, Saint Elizabeth watched with growing alarm, questioning why one participant refused to yield. Aprudo, observing the scene, explained that the Saintess's skill, known as incitement, was at play. This ability eradicated hesitation and fear, compelling the affected individual to press forward regardless of the danger. As the battle raged, Saint Elizabeth extended a hand, her expression etched with concern, while Aprudo remained composed, noting that the decisive moment was fast approaching. He then declared his intention to enter the fray, acknowledging that even in a mock battle, He could not afford to suffer defeat. Stepping into the arena, Aprudo found himself face-to-face with Tristan Noir, who greeted him with a wide grin, remarking on his long-awaited entry. Tristan continued, expressing his eagerness to finally witness Aprudo's rumored prowess, having heard much about his reputation as one of the best. Aprudo's eyes narrowed, reflecting his intense focus and readiness for the impending confrontation. Tristan, still grinning, mused that fate must be smiling upon him to grant such an opportunity so soon. His excitement became almost manic, a wide, unsettling grin spreading across his face as he struggled to contain his eagerness. With a final challenge, Tristan urged them to cut each other down, but Aprudo, his expression stern, simply retorted that he talked too much. In an instant, their blades met, initiating a fierce exchange. He continued his defense against Tristan Noir's relentless assault, their blades clashing with furious speed. Tristan, his face alight with a manic grin, declared the battle exhilarating, calling Aprudo absolute. A nearby student watched in wide-eyed shock, while St. Elizabeth observed the intense exchange with a serene, almost contemplative expression. Tristan pressed his advantage, launching a powerful kick that sent a shockwave through the air. He taunted his opponent, asking if he was struggling, if the blows hurt. Aprudo, anticipating the next move, tightened his grip on his sword, his mind already formulating a response to the relentless pressure. He wondered how to counter this new tactic. With a sudden burst of speed, he unleashed a swift counterattack, his eyes narrowed in fierce determination as he challenged Tristan. He observed Tristan's movements, a realization dawning upon him. His opponent possessed a mastery of multiple sword styles, indicating a deeper level of skill than initially perceived. Tristan, unfazed by the counter, merely widened his manic grin, dropping into a low crouch as if reveling in the intensity of the duel. Rising to his feet, Tristan addressed Aprudo, proposing they commemorate this battle as their anniversary. He praised Aprudo, remarking that it was a momentous occasion to find someone who could actually keep pace with him. Aprudo recoiled, his face contorted in a mix of shock and irritation at the mention of an anniversary. In the background, Lady Alicia watched the exchange, her expression unreadable. Tristan maintained his smirk, clearly enjoying Aprudo's discomfort, while Lady Alicia averted her gaze, a blush creeping onto her cheeks as she clasped her hands together. Tristan lunged forward once more, his foot stomping down with force, as he provocatively suggested that Aprudo should attack alongside Alicia if he truly wished for a chance to defeat him. He continued his relentless assault, his blade a blur as he pressed Aprudo, forcing him to parry with swift, defensive movements. Despite the ongoing intensity, Aprudo found a moment to retort, questioning Tristan's honor. He declared that it was rich coming from Tristan, who was still fighting alone even with the Saintess backing him up, and that ganging up on him would hardly be an honorable way to settle their mock battle. Tristan merely threw his head back and laughed maniacally, clearly enjoying Aprudo's defiance. His laughter subsided, replaced by a dark, knowing smirk as he acknowledged Aprudo's unique nature, remarking that he truly was something else. With renewed vigor, Tristan lunged forward, his expression sharp, warning Aprudo not to use any excuses should he lose. Their blades met again with a violent clash, sparks flying as the two combatants engaged in a fierce exchange. From the stands, Lady Alicia watched the intense duel unfold, her attention fixed on the two figures locked in combat on the arena floor. A look of utter disbelief crossed her face as she murmured, unable to comprehend what she was witnessing. St. Elizabeth, observing alongside Alicia, explained that Tristan belonged to the Keiko family, renowned for their martial prowess, and was no pushover. She noted that Aprudo, with the Saintess's buff, should indeed be strong enough to contend with a hero, yet she found herself surprised that he was fighting Tristan so evenly. The mock battle continued with breathtaking speed, Aprudo's movements fluid and precise, prompting an internal thought about the sheer beauty of his swordplay. He continued his fierce engagement with Tristan Noir, who lunged forward with a powerful, sweeping sword strike, forcing Aprudo to swiftly parry the blow. Meanwhile, from the sidelines, Lady Alicia watched with a look of surprise, questioning if the figure observing the duel was indeed Saintess Elizabeth. The Saintess, for her part, remained composed, her gaze fixed on the combatants. As the fight intensified, St. Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly, and Tristan Noir, sensing her attention, called out to her, requesting her support. Responding to his plea, St. Elizabeth extended her hands, bestowing upon Tristan Noir the blessing of the Saintess. He acknowledged her assistance with a grateful, "Thank you." With the blessing coursing through him, Tristan Noir felt an incredible surge of energy, exclaiming that his body was overflowing with power. Empowered, he launched a flurry of attacks, his speed and strength visibly increased. However, Aprudo observed that Tristan was struggling to keep pace with his own enhanced movements, causing his precision to falter. He surmised that this lack of coordination was to be expected, given it was their first time working together. From her vantage point, St. Elizabeth reflected on the body enhancement magic. She noted that while the magic itself wasn't overly impressive, its potential to be used on a large group would be a nightmare. She then wondered if this was the true limit of their combined abilities. Tristan Noir continued his relentless assault, taunting Aprudo for his sudden silence. Meanwhile, St. Elizabeth's thoughts drifted to an even more potent possibility, combining the body enhancement with an incitement that could erase fear. Aprudo, having absorbed enough of the exchange, declared with a resolute gaze that he had seen all he needed to see. It was time to bring the confrontation to an end. With a swift, decisive motion, he lowered his sword, preparing for a final strike, leaving Tristan Noir looking on in stunned surprise. He launched himself forward with incredible force, his body a blur of motion, aiming a powerful kick directly at Tristan Noir. Tristan, however, remained calm, his sharp eyes tracking the incoming assault with unwavering focus. Despite the ferocity of his strike, the impact sent him recoiling violently, shards of the ground erupting around him as he cried out in pain. The unexpected turn of events shocked the onlookers. St. Elizabeth gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief, while Lady Alicia covered her mouth in astonishment, both witnessing the swift and decisive counter. Aprudo lay defeated against a shattered wall, his body slumped. Tristan Noir stood over him, remarking that while his swordsmanship had been impressive, his precision was slightly off. He then challenged him, suggesting they have a real one-on-one fight at the academy next time, his expression confident and slightly mocking. Aprudo, still slumped against the wall, managed a wry smile, realizing that Tristan had been holding back the entire time. He acknowledged that he still had much to learn. With that humbling realization, he formally declared his surrender, bringing the intense confrontation to an end. St. Elizabeth, her hands raised, seemed to offer a silent acknowledgement or blessing as Tristan Noir turned to face her, his gaze steady. A voice boomed, announcing the conclusion of the match and declaring the winner. Tristan Noir began to walk away, his victory secured. Lady Alicia watched him depart, a look of surprise still on her face, while St. Elizabeth also observed his exit. A young woman with braided hair wrung her hands, her expression etched with deep worry as she pondered her next move, questioning what she should do. Her thoughts raced, consumed by the potential disaster if Alto, the hero, were to confront the Arc family at the academy. She recalled the hero's unwavering declaration that it was his duty to put villains in their place, and his specific threat to destroy the Arc family, whom he believed to be absolute scum. The memory of Tristan Noir's unexpected strength in their previous encounter only amplified her distress, making her realize such a conflict would be catastrophic. She realized with urgency that she had to warn Alto the moment she returned to the mansion, her gaze fixed on the towering spires of a distant building. Meanwhile, within the grand halls of the Arc family mansion, numerous members of the esteemed household gathered, their presence filling the opulent room. Among them, Tristan Noir stood, a glass of wine held casually in his hand, as he observed the various family members assembled on the elegant staircase and within the main hall. He then addressed the gathered Arc family members, commending them for their tireless training and assuring them that their efforts had not been in vain. He reminded them that they would soon enter the academy, a place where it was said social status did not matter, but he quickly added that they all knew this was a lie, and that hierarchy would always persist. He continued, asserting that they must prove themselves and unequivocally demonstrate the true power of the Arc family. Lady Alicia, standing nearby, added that for generations, the Arc family had been branded as scoundrels and despised, simply because they undertook the necessary work that others considered themselves too pure to handle. Tristan Noir, his gaze sharp and resolute, responded that if handling the world's dirty work made them villains, then he would wear that title with pride for as long as he lived. He concluded, emphasizing that some of their work undeniably saved lives, whether others admitted it or not, and above all, he was proud to be an Arc. Tristan Noir, addressing a group of students, posed a critical question. Why did others look down on them and mock them publicly? Daniel, standing among the students, offered a direct answer, stating that it was because others believed them to be weak. Tristan Noir, his expression fierce, reiterated his earlier declaration, asserting that they would prove their detractors wrong and demonstrate exactly what the Arc family was capable of. His words resonated with the assembled students, who stood before him, their expressions a mix of apprehension and growing resolve. He continued, reminding them that they were no longer weaklings deserving of mockery. Now, he insisted, they must demonstrate their true strength. Tristan Noir then warned them of the fate of villains without power, who would be trampled by those wielding justice. He urged them to stand and fight with him if they wished to avoid such a fate. He declared that he would always stand at the front, leading the way. He then implored them, as members of the Arc family, to take pride in who they were, even if the world branded them as villains. The students, including Haniel, student male E, and others, listened intently, their faces hardening with determination. From outside the grand building, the unified voices of the students echoed, affirming their commitment with a resounding, "Yes, sir." Tristan Noir's voice then cut through, announcing that it was time to show the world the pride of the villainous Arc family. With their resolve solidified, Tristan Noir led the entire group of Arc family students forward, their steps purposeful and united. He emphasized that this first step was crucial, marking the beginning of their absolute path, now firmly set in stone. Tristan Noir, standing within the grand Arc residence, announced his departure. He informed those present that he was heading out, as only the entrance ceremony was scheduled for the day. He then instructed Uru and Maria, two maids, to complete the unpacking ahead of time. The maids acknowledged his command, understanding that starting the next day, they would accompany him to the Reincarnate Royal Academy and needed to be prepared. Soon after, a coachman guided a stately carriage through the streets, presumably carrying Tristan to his destination. As the carriage passed, two male students observed it with murmurs, one of them, Michael, wondering aloud if it could be that carriage. The grand entrance of the Reincarnate Royal Academy bustled with new students, their varied expressions reflecting anticipation and nervousness. Among them, a distinct group, led by Tristan Noir, made their way through the gates, their presence commanding attention. As they advanced, an unspoken understanding rippled through the onlookers. This was the Aprudo Arc, a name whispered with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Elsewhere, Other students exchanged uneasy glances, one questioning if the Ark households had always possessed such a dangerous aura. Another wondered aloud if they weren't supposed to be comprised mostly of low-ranking nobles, their current demeanor contradicting that expectation. The conversation intensified as one student, his face contorted in a grimace, recounted the rumors. The Ark household was said to be behind a dangerous underground group. He listed their notorious members, including Urith, the mad dog, known for clashing with top nobles, and Lady Cruel, the social scene star. He demanded to know what was truly happening, while Lady Alicia offered a subtle, knowing smile. Tristan, sensing the palpable tension and the whispers surrounding his group, felt the weight of the pressure. He mused that perhaps the rumors were not mere fabrications after all. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, reflected a fierce determination. Every step he took was deliberate, a silent declaration that this moment, this first impression, would set the tone for everything that followed. He considered the precariousness of their position, knowing he could not allow other students to look down upon them. He vowed to crush any who dared to disrespect them in his presence, but also worried about protecting his charges when he was not around. He resolved that they must make it unequivocally clear the Aprudo Ark was an overwhelming force, and those under his banner were not to be taken lightly. With a commanding gesture, Tristan rallied his followers, his voice ringing out with conviction. "Let us demonstrate the unity of the Ark household here and now," he declared, his gaze sweeping over his assembled group. Yet, despite his powerful words, several of his male followers visibly flinched, beads of sweat forming on their brows as they struggled to meet his intense gaze, revealing a nervous apprehension beneath their unified front. A group of students nervously discussed the implications of the Ark faction's presence. One student, despite the clear danger, still expressed a desire to approach Lady San, while another cautioned against getting too close to the notorious group. A third student voiced his strong wish to avoid being in the same class as any of them, and a fourth agreed that keeping distance from the Ark faction was the wisest course. Their apprehension was well-founded, for rumors circulated about a student who had become too persistent with the Ark faction, and it was said that Aprudo Ark had nearly killed him. The dark-haired leader stood over the fallen, bloodied figure, his sword still drawn, a chilling testament to the faction's ruthlessness. As the whispers of past violence spread, the imposing academy building loomed, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Tristan Noir, the supreme leader of the Ark faction, stood nearby, his presence a stark reminder to engrave the name of his faction and its leader, Aprudo, into their minds. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, countless students gathered, their faces a mix of anticipation and unease, unaware of the full extent of the power dynamics now at play within their new academic home. Among them, Chris felt a profound sense of dread, his eyes wide with terror as the weight of the situation settled upon him. Sensing his distress, Aprudo gently placed a hand on Chris's shoulder, offering reassurance. He apologized, stating that for someone meant to serve Aprudo-sama, being placed in Class B was unthinkable, implying a higher expectation for Chris. Meanwhile, a cheerful Oriana Festa declared with enthusiasm that assisting Aprudo-sama would be her duty, vowing to tend to his every need from beginning to end. Chris looked on, surprised by her fervent declaration. The discussion continued among the students, with one noting that Oriana and Mist were the only others who had made it into Class A. Mist Brazer, with a gentle smile, humbly responded that she herself would have only managed Class C, and her placement in Class A was entirely thanks to Aprudo-sama's instruction. Oriana, still beaming, playfully nudged Mist, while Tristan Noir, observing their exchange, dismissed their praise, finding their flattery irritating. The king, addressing the assembled new students, offered his heartfelt congratulations and extended the Academy's most sincere welcome. Among the many faces in the audience, Oriana Festa, Mist Brazer, and Tristan Noir listened intently. This grand institution was the Reincarnated Royal Academy, a prestigious establishment where nobles enrolled at the age of 15. However, the Academy's true measure of status within its walls was not solely determined by noble rank or test scores, but by real capabilities. Commoners with noble backing or those recommended by the church or renowned merchants could also gain admission. Following the initial welcome, the new student representative, Michael Rainana, stepped forward to deliver his speech. He began by expressing his sincere gratitude to the principal and all faculty members for their gracious words of welcome. He continued, declaring that as citizens of the Kingdom of Reinana, they all vowed to study and grow at the Academy, striving to become individuals of whom their homeland could be proud. His gaze swept across the assembled students as he spoke of strengthening the bonds with fellow companions, those who would one day stand beside them in supporting the Kingdom of Reinana. He concluded with a powerful declaration, stating that their collective goal was to become strong enough, as Tristan Noir's intense gaze seemed to affirm, to stand against any evil. With his speech concluded, Michael Reinana looked forward to the next 3 years with all of them, as the students bowed in respect. As Tristan Noir walked away, Aprudo confronted him, asking if he was planning to gather followers. He pressed further, demanding to know if Tristan intended to take down Aprudo and claw his way back to the Crown Prince's seat, questioning if his understanding was correct. He calmly acknowledged that he had thought stripping Aprudo of the Crown Prince title was the end of it, but then paused, realizing Aprudo had not given up. Aprudo, with a fierce gaze, declared that if Tristan wanted a fight, he would give him one, noting that with the hero, the saint, and now the ex-Crown Prince, the original story events were truly kicking in, bringing more important things to deal with. He, with a confident smirk, asserted that in the end, the one left standing would be him, Aprudo. The next day, he departed in a carriage, with a maid waving him off, wishing him a pleasant journey. As the carriage moved through the city, he reflected on the unfolding main story events, admitting he had no idea how he should play his part, despite having just declared his intent. He knew he couldn't afford to lose, but going along with the original events just didn't feel right to him, a thought that prompted a maid to call out to him. Master, the two maids, Haniel and another, looked at him with worried expressions, clearly sensing his internal struggle. He quickly dismissed their concern, telling them there was no need to look at him with such worry, as it was just a trivial matter, adding that he was merely thinking about something for a bit. He sat on a plush sofa, addressing two maids before him. He informed them that, starting today, their duties at the academy would include escorting him to and from school, as well as preparing his lunch. He then clarified that they would operate separately as a rule, asking if they understood. The blonde maid, Maria, responded with a polite affirmation, stating, "As you wish." Maria smiled gently as the younger maid, you, looked on with a determined expression. He concluded their discussion by stating he was counting on them. Soon after, the three of them walked together along a paved path, approaching the grand entrance of a large, ornate building, presumably the academy. Upon arrival, he was greeted by a group of students, all dressed in similar uniforms, who offered cheerful morning salutations. He then turned to his maids, informing them that they would part ways there and instructing them to remain in the standby building until mealtime. The maids bowed respectfully as he departed with the other students. Left alone, you gazed at the magnificent school building with wide-eyed wonder, exclaiming her amazement at its size and the sheer number of people present. "School is amazing," she declared. Maria observed her, a slight smile playing on her lips. She remarked that you seemed particularly energetic these days, like her old self, and gently inquired if something significant had occurred. You, flustered by the question, confessed her desire to become truly worthy as Aprudo-sama's maid, then quickly corrected herself, stammering that she actually wanted to be a mature woman like Maria. Maria covered her mouth, suppressing a chuckle, and reassured you that she didn't believe Aprudo-sama would mind her earnest, if somewhat clumsy, way of speaking. She reassured you, telling her there was no need to worry, as she was still a fine maid, and urged her to keep moving. Suddenly, a male student appeared, his eyes wide with surprise, recognizing her. He pointed at her, exclaiming that she was the one from the martial arts tournament. You watched the unfolding interaction, her eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of concern. The male student's face remained etched with shock and disbelief as he stared at Maria. He then demanded to know who she was, his voice filled with a mix of confusion and accusation. She turned her head slightly, dismissing him with a calm demeanor, stating that she had duties to attend to. He reached out, attempting to stop her, calling for her to wait a minute. As he grabbed her arm, she remained unyielding, her stance firm. You, witnessing the aggressive move, glared at him with a furious expression. Maria's expression hardened, and she sternly questioned his impropriety, asking if he was aware that they belonged to the Ark household. He tried to maintain his grip, but a jolt of surprise ran through him as he realized her strength was immense, far beyond what he expected. The male student, still reeling from Maria's unexpected strength, attempted to explain himself, insisting he was merely trying to speak with the beastkin student. However, Maria, with a stern expression, declared his behavior unacceptable, while Alicia, observing the scene, looked on in surprise. As the male student continued to look distressed, Alicia, her expression now one of concern, questioned if he had done something wrong. Another male student nearby watched the unfolding drama with a subtle smile. Her concern quickly turned to fury as Alicia's eyes widened in disbelief. She found it absolutely unforgivable that he would dare to flirt with someone of her status, a thought that consumed her with rage. Amidst Alicia's growing fury, Maria stepped forward, her composure unwavering. She inquired about Alicia's household, stating her intention to reprimand the male student strictly and extend an apology to Alicia's employer later. Having established her authority, Maria then introduced herself as a humble servant of the Ark household. Alicia, in turn, revealed her name as Alicia Mirai, identifying the kneeling male student as Alto, the shameless flirt. With her identity revealed and the situation addressed, Maria calmly stated that she would report the incident to her master and then, with you by her side, bid them farewell. Alicia, meanwhile, was left utterly shocked by Maria's declaration. As Maria and you departed, Alto, still kneeling, stammered in disbelief, questioning the implications of the Ark household. Alicia, beside him, remained in a state of profound distress. "What the hell have you done, E.E.? Trouble from the very beginning of school." Lady Alicia, with her elegant blonde curls, posed a rhetorical question to herself, wondering if any trouble could truly befall a school dedicated to noble children. Her thoughts drifted as a grand training facility, adorned with intricate Gothic architecture, filled with numerous students, came into view. It was a place of immense scale, designed for the rigorous education of the elite. As she observed the vastness of the hall, Alicia exclaimed at its sheer size. Chris, standing beside her, confirmed that it was indeed one of the academy's largest training facilities. However, the male student with them, Alto Quinn, expressed his confusion, noting that they had only been instructed to gather there, with no further explanation. Alicia then added that it seemed the mysterious Absolute had not yet arrived. Suddenly, Alto Quinn became agitated, prompting Alicia to loudly urge him to settle down, while Chris also admonished him to behave himself. Despite their efforts, he walked away, leaving Alicia to lament her constant entanglement in such situations, fearing her father's disapproval once more. Chris sighed, acknowledging that news of Alto's outburst had likely already spread. Alto-kun, now alone, wore a subtle, almost unsettling smile as he silently uttered Alicia's name. He wore a sinister smile, his eyes wide with a disturbing intensity, as a thought echoed in his mind. The Arc household faction has made their appearance. Just as Alto-kun's thoughts settled, a distinct sound of footsteps echoed through the grand hall, announcing the arrival of a new group of students. As they advanced, more students from the Arc household faction emerged, their presence drawing the attention of everyone gathered. The sudden influx caused a ripple of murmurs and wide-eyed surprise among the existing students, including Alto-kun and Chris, who watched with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. Amidst the growing tension, Lady Alicia, ever composed, acknowledged the challenges that came with the popularity of Absolute Sama, yet reassured those around her that they had her support. Meanwhile, within the newly arrived faction, a student with braided hair expressed her concern that the day was already feeling like a failure, asking if they should simply leave. Another student, with short light hair, suggested they take it easy, addressing their leader as Absolute Sama. Their leader, Tristan Noir, listened intently, his expression hardening as he internally deemed the onlookers such insolent people. The general student body continued to observe the new arrivals with a mixture of apprehension and unease, their faces reflecting the palpable shift in the atmosphere. Suddenly, Tristan Noir's gaze sharpened, his eyes wide with a menacing intensity as he challenged the staring students, demanding to know if they had a death wish. His aggressive outburst sent a shockwave through the hall, causing many of the students to flinch, cower, or even fall to their knees in fear, unable to withstand his intimidating presence. The student with braided hair, now visibly shaken and cowering, realized the profound impact of their leader's arrival, acknowledging that the entire atmosphere had irrevocably changed. She continued to push Alto-kun forward, urging him to endure the pressure, though she internally acknowledged that his current state was akin to pouring oil on a fire. Meanwhile, across the training grounds, Aprudo, standing beside Tristan Noir, inquired if Absolute Sama intended to pick a fight on their very first day. Tristan Noir, with a subtle smirk, simply noted that a few individuals had indeed endured the initial intimidation. As the tension lingered, a new voice cut through the air, addressing the assembled students with a casual, yet commanding, "You guys," and "Hey hey." Their attention was drawn to a new figure. Among the students, one questioned if this newcomer was planning trouble right after enrolling, wondering if he was too fired up, while another simply pondered who he might be. The man who had spoken now revealed himself, introducing himself as Teach Toad, the instructor in charge of Class A, and suggested they all endeavor to get along. He then surveyed the assembled students, acknowledging that while it was natural to be curious about their classmates, staring at them was considered bad manners. With a wide gesture, he continued, proposing that if they were truly that curious about one another, they should utilize the training facility and engage in a mock battle. He challenged them further, declaring this their chance to fight and truly get to know each other, asking if they were not, in fact, wondering how strong their classmates truly were. A thoughtful expression crossed his face as he considered the implications of his proposal. His gaze seemed to fall upon specific individuals, as Alto-kun and Oriana Festa looked on with surprise, while Tristan Noir maintained his composed, subtly smirking demeanor, the words Arc and Alto hanging in the air. Oriana Festa, with her blonde pigtails, looked on with a surprised expression, uttering a soft, as the instructor's words settled over the class. The instructor, Teach Toad, then pointed directly at two students, declaring the mock battle would begin with them. Oriana Festa gasped in shock, while Alto-kun and Tristan Noir stood ready among the other students. Suddenly, Tristan Noir vanished from his spot, leaving only a faint outline. Alto-kun looked on, seemingly unfazed, while Oriana Festa, alarmed, called out to him, warning him not to do anything reckless, especially against an absolute opponent. Oriana Festa remained bewildered by Tristan Noir's sudden disappearance, but Alto-kun and Tristan Noir, now standing closer, exchanged knowing smiles, as if sharing a private understanding. Still concerned, Oriana Festa called out to Alto-kun again, demanding to know what he was doing. Teach Toad, hands on his hips, instructed Alto-kun and Tristan Noir to get into position, urging them to hurry. As they faced each other, Alto-kun, with a confident smirk, introduced himself to Tristan Noir, stating it was their first time speaking and proudly declaring himself a hero. Tristan Noir, however, simply thought to himself that he already knew this, a hint of annoyance on his face. Tristan Noir couldn't shake a strange, unsettling feeling about Alto-kun, sensing that his opponent's eyes weren't truly focused on him. He then cut to the chase, revealing he had already investigated Alto-kun and considered himself fortunate to face him so early in their training. Teach Toad continued to observe the unfolding exchange. Alto-kun, his expression now serious, proposed a condition for their battle. If he won, Tristan Noir must promise to cease his wrongdoings. He knew the truth. Tristan Noir's household was deeply entangled with an underground syndicate. Furthermore, he was aware that Tristan had been abusing a young beastkin girl. Tristan Noir reacted with utter shock and confusion, questioning what Alto-kun was even talking about. As Tristan pondered the meaning of Alto-kun's words, Alto-kun pressed his challenge, declaring that if Tristan lost, he would be forced to confess everything and atone for his sins. He continued, adding that he also disliked Tristan's condescending manner and began to move forward with a determined stride. With a powerful roar, Alto-kun charged, initiating the mock battle without waiting for any signal. Teach Toad, witnessing Alto-kun's premature charge and his accusations against a classmate, quickly intervened, shouting for him to stop, reminding him that the signal to begin had not yet been given. Undeterred, Alto-kun struck Teach Toad with a forceful blow, declaring that the instructor was merely in his way. He then prepared a devastating attack, proclaiming it to be the hero's attack that smites only the wicked, and unleashed a powerful holy out. A blinding explosion of light and force erupted from Alto-kun's position, engulfing the mock battle arena. Alto-kun, confident in his power, declared for all to behold his holy super magic, a technique that strikes only those he deems enemies, asserting that no one could possibly withstand such an assault. He had just unleashed his holy super magic, and now, Tristan Noir, wiping a speck of blood from his cheek, calmly observed him. Tristan remarked that Alto-kun's words now sounded precisely like those of a villain. Despite the powerful attack, Tristan Noir stood largely unharmed, a subtle smirk playing on his lips as he addressed Alto-kun with a mocking, "Oh, Mr. Hero." Around them, the other students reacted with shock and disbelief, with one exclaiming, "He withstood the holy out," and others crying out, "Absolute sama." As the realization of Tristan's resilience settled, several students, including Oriana Festa and another female student, surged forward, their faces contorted in anger. They declared that they must stop the hero, condemning Alto-kun for attacking their teacher and then launching a sneak attack, deeming it unforgivable. However, Tristan Noir remained unperturbed, standing within a glowing magic circle. He firmly told the approaching students to stay where they were, asserting that this was his fight and questioning if they truly intended to face one person with an entire group. His calm demeanor quickly shattered, replaced by a furious roar as Tristan Noir's face twisted in pure rage. He demanded to know if Alto-kun dared to make a fool of him. Alto-kun, observing Tristan's reaction, admitted that he had held up better than expected, having thought his attack would hit harder. Tristan merely scoffed in response. With a renewed surge of determination, Alto-kun declared his next move, preparing to unleash a powerful holy lance as energy crackled around his hands and feet. As Alto-kun lunged, Tristan Noir moved with incredible speed, dodging the attack and delivering a swift counter. He taunted Alto-kun, declaring him too slow. Tristan Noir's fist connected squarely with Alto-kun's face, a brutal impact that sent blood spraying and Alto-kun reeling backward amidst shattered debris. He reeled from the impact, blood erupting from his mouth as he cried out in pain. The force of the blow sent him crashing into a wall, which crumbled around him. Tristan Noir stood over him, declaring that it was over, and that without talent, he should have dedicated himself solely to the sword. Yet, Alto-kun slowly lifted his head, his face smeared with blood, a wide, unsettling grin spreading across his lips as he defiantly claimed the punch had not hurt him at all. Tristan Noir watched, his eyes narrowed. He then collapsed to his hands and knees, but his resolve remained unbroken. He vowed not to lose to the likes of Tristan Noir, asserting that too many people in the country were suffering because of Tristan's family. Driven by his conviction, Alto-kun pushed himself back to his feet, his body trembling. He declared his duty as a hero to save everyone, including a specific girl, and with a desperate cry, urged Tristan Noir to hurry up and die. Before he could act, Tristan Noir moved with blinding speed, appearing behind him and seizing him. A sickening crunch echoed as Tristan delivered another devastating blow, causing Alto-kun's internal structure to visibly fracture. Alto-kun stumbled forward, his body swaying precariously, blood continuing to trickle from his mouth. Witnessing the brutal assault, Oriana Festa watched in horror, her hands clasped over her mouth, a desperate cry of Alto-kun escaping her lips. Overwhelmed by the repeated blows, he finally collapsed face down onto the ground, blood pooling beneath him, a single, defeated thought echoing in his mind. So weak. As Alto-kun lay defeated, Tristan Noir stood over his prone form, delivering a final, scathing indictment. He dismissed Alto-kun's impressive words as empty talk, calling him a brat who was quick to demand the hero's privilege, yet shirked the duty that came with it. He stood over the defeated Alto-kun, who, despite his severe injuries, defiantly shouted for him to shut up, questioning what he even knew about the situation. Alto-kun, his face bloodied and contorted in rage, cursed Tristan Noir as a fiend, vowing to take him down and save the girl. Unmoved by the boy's desperate words, Tristan Noir turned slightly, a dark aura swirling around him, and calmly acknowledged his role, declaring himself a villain, the worst this country had ever seen. He then bid a mocking farewell, proclaiming, "So long, O noble defender of justice." The battle concluded, Alto-kun's body went limp, his head lolling as he was held by Tristan Noir, utterly defeated. His unconscious form was then dropped to the ground, a sight that drew a shocked, silent gasp from a female student observing the brutal display. Alto-kun lay motionless, his face a mask of pain, blood staining his mouth and chin, a testament to the severity of Tristan Noir's assault. Tristan Noir stood tall over the fallen hero, addressing the stunned crowd of students, explaining that killing him would save everyone. He continued, his expression serious, that even if they were to kill him, another villain would simply rise to take his place, implying a deeper, systemic issue. His gaze then shifted, and he called out, "Lady," drawing the attention of Lady Alicia and the other female students, who looked on with wide, shocked eyes. Tristan Noir, his expression sharp and commanding, issued a series of directives. He instructed Oriana to keep a close watch on the hero, ensuring he could not escape, and ordered Miss to bind the hero with ropes to a pillar. Simultaneously, he commanded that the situation be explained to the other teachers, who were to be brought to their location. His final order was for everyone to move into action, attacking anyone exhibiting suspicious behavior. The students, including Oriana and Mist, responded with unified determination, acknowledging his command with resolute expressions. Amidst the unfolding chaos, Saint Elizabeth stepped forward, her hands clasped, offering to take charge of the healing for the injured. As the situation began to stabilize, Tristan Noir and Saint Elizabeth found themselves in the grand hall, the other students observing from a distance. He then directly addressed her, his gaze piercing, questioning if she was truly behind the hero's recent rampage. She, in turn, calmly inquired how she might be of assistance to him. She responded with an innocent smile, denying any wrongdoing and feigning ignorance regarding his accusations.